This is the second and final video I'll be making on the God of War franchise until the release of the next game. The first video was over the first 6 games, and this video will cover God of War 2018, which is one of my favorite games on the PS4. It is something that I love despite its imperfections, no matter how numerous. Where the previous games in the franchise were about Kratos and his quest for revenge against the gods that perpetually wronged him, this game goes in a completely different direction. It's a much more mature story than its predecessors, which in an oxymoronic way actually means it's more family-friendly. I'm glad that it is, because that means I don't need to poorly censor all the scenes with nudity. There's no reason to bring back the Pikachu meme, sorry. This new direction also fits perfectly with Kratos' older and wiser demeanor, and I think that would be greatly diminished if they had a troll sex minigame somewhere around the halfway point, although that would make those encounters infinitely more interesting and would be a cool alternative way of dealing with them.
We have no choice.
Before we get into the game itself, I would like to talk about a few things I've learned since my last video, as well as what I did for this run. There are some plot details that were clarified by the game's writers that I want to share, and hopefully explaining how I went about this last playthrough will give some insight to some of my criticism. In my last video, I dedicated some time to talking about when Kratos regained his godhood. I recently saw a tweet from one of the lead writers for this game clarifying this detail. I blacked out most of the tweet because it contains spoilers, but what's important to note is that Kratos never actually did regain his godhood, which explains why he's able to show fatigue in this game. Kratos is only a demigod, which absolutely crushes my Blade of Olympus theory, and now makes me wonder just how he survived being impaled with the blade at the end of God of War 3 if that same wound killed him in God of War 2. I wanted to share this up front because I was under the impression Kratos regained at least some of his power from the blade, but apparently this is wrong. I'll be coming back to this tweet at the very end of the video where I explain why this answer is so damaging to the foundation of the entire franchise, especially God of War 1. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about my experience while playing recently. I only did one playthrough for this video, but I have done 3 others in the past. I decided to play the game on Give Me God of War because I wanted to see how well balanced the difficulty is throughout the game, but more importantly to see whether the combat system cracks and breaks with numbers tuned this tightly. I will explain all of that in my combat analysis, which is going to come much later in this video than I want it to, but it involves major spoilers for the second half of the game. Most of you watching now probably know everything about this game and its story already, but I prefer to do these videos in a what we know at this time fashion. There are some things like information about previous games that I won't do this for, but I will for almost everything else. I do this for numerous reasons. For one, this helps to view the events through the perspective of a new player and gives us a reason to appreciate how this perspective can change whenever you have more information. There's some very big revelations in this game, and I like to unveil them organically instead of spilling everything at the beginning and losing that intrigue. It's also a safety net for those watching who don't know everything about the game and might decide they want to play it after the spoiler warning. They might get a quarter of the way through the story and change their mind, and the biggest plot points weren't spoiled in the first 20 minutes of the video. Isn't it crazy how the first 20 minutes is considered the beginning now? Another reason I decided to play on Give Me God of War is because I wanted to see just how extreme the difference is from the other difficulties I've already tried. It's definitely not as difficult as playing The Last of Us on Grounded mode, which is the game feel equivalent of breaking your pencil at the start of a test, but there was never a spot that I felt was impossible, only parts that I would describe as the Ornstein and Smough of this game. The combat analysis for this video will begin about halfway through the story, so you'll see what I mean when we get to that point. With all that out of the way, let's get into the game itself. As great as the presentation of this game is, it's still not perfect. You may be surprised to hear that this game was rushed to release during its development. If you haven't watched the Raising Kratos documentary on YouTube, I would highly recommend it, because it goes into a lot of detail about the state of the studio while making this game, and the difficulties they faced during its dev cycle. There are numerous other interviews with Cory Barlog that talk about the scope of the project and how they had to battle their own ambition to remain within it. The reason I'm saying this now is because many flaws, plot holes, or otherwise inconsistencies in the story are most likely known by the writers. I'm not going to completely ignore these, but I'm also not going to harp on about them for as long as I would if I didn't know as much about the development of this game as I do now. Despite how that sounds, my criticism of those sections are still several pages long, but a lot of my points are within the context of what the actual problem was. They had enough story written for 3 full games, and they tried to condense it into 1, which is why some events in the middle of the game feel rushed and a little contrived. Much of the setup was lost due to time and budget limitations, and that's honestly a real shame. However, there are many other issues that I am not going to go so easy on, mostly because of how long this game has been out. Many of these day one gripes are still present within the game, and that's a real problem. Unless there is a deliberate reason that kicking down the chain to open a shortcut forces you to start climbing down when you don't want to, then I don't see why it hasn't been fixed yet. Most of the issues I dealt with are much deeper problems that don't have easy solutions, but let it be known that as of December of 2020, this well-known, well-established annoyance has never been patched. Most of the other issues I'll talk about in the combat analysis, but for now, let's go ahead and get into the actual story. The game starts with Kratos hugging a tree with a glowing handprint on it, which is obviously an environmentalist take that is meant to describe how he is now one with nature. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot to unpack in this first scene, so let's go ahead and play it out.
Found some.
Get in the boat, boy.
If you're new to the franchise, or had no prior knowledge of it before turning on this video, then Kratos getting upset about his bandages unraveling may be just a small detail that makes you wonder what's going on, but if you have played the previous games, then you know this covers his scars from where the Blades of Chaos were seared onto him. Another thing to point out right here in the beginning is just how great the sound design of this game is, which isn't something I considered while playing any of the previous games. Everyone talks about how great the graphics in this game are, but I seldom see anybody acknowledge how seamless the sound design is.
Father,
What?
did something change? The forest feels different.
Everything is different, boy. Try not to dwell on it.
The Leviathan axe will make a different sound depending on what it hits. Footsteps make a different sound depending on what surface you're walking on, and there is overall a lot of attention to detail that goes unnoticed and unappreciated. Not to mention the sounds of leaves rustling and birds chirping. You can hear a distant waterfall before you even see it. None of this is revolutionary, that's not what I'm implying, but the combination of it makes these woods feel alive and realistic. The visuals are just as great if you're willing to pay attention. The hairs on Kratos' beard and the furs on his armor wave in the breeze during cutscenes. You leave footprints in the snow and mud when you walk through it, and there are just a lot of tiny details that didn't need to be added to the game but were anyways. Somebody cared enough to put these in here, and I care enough to point it out. You bring the tree back to your house, and Kratos says that it was the last one. Atreus runs inside and approaches a corpse that has been wrapped in linen cloth and is being prepared for a funeral. This is one of the few times that the camera will move from Kratos' perspective. Atreus says a prayer over the body and tells Kratos that she's ready for whatever ceremony they have prepared for her. Kratos carries the body to a funeral pyre and lights it on fire. Again, just pointing out small details that shouldn't matter, you can see the visuals being distorted by the heat around the pyre just like it would in real life. I promise I'm not going to jerk the game on every minor detail, but this intro is a great way of getting all this praise out of the way early, because there will be plenty of criticisms to come later. Atreus runs up and grabs the knife off the body but burns his hand in the process. Kratos tends to the burn and wraps it in a bandage, then gives Atreus the knife. Kratos tells Atreus that they're going hunting and gives the most accurate instructions somebody could.
Which way?
In the direction of deer.
You now begin to travel through the woods, and there are various things you can interact with for additional dialogue. You will learn that the woman they were burning on the funeral pyre was Atreus' mother and Kratos' wife. This is the first family member Kratos has ever had who has died of natural causes. Atreus catches up to the deer, and this is the result.
There it is!
Hold! What are you doing? Now his guard is up. Only fire. Only fire. When I tell you to fire.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better. Find it. Find
This scene gives the impression that Kratos is still quick to temper but has now learned to control his anger to some degree. I prefer to give him a pass here because he did just have a funeral for his wife 5 minutes ago, and he's only out here with Atreus to make sure that he's ready for what's to come. It may not seem like it, but a lot is at stake with this hunting trip, and Atreus cannot afford to be making stupid mistakes. That's how I see it, at least. You run into your first combat encounter after this, and this is when I believed that I was about to get annihilated. The very first time I attempted this difficulty, it took me well over an hour to beat this fight, but it really isn't that bad if you know what you're doing. You can take some detours and hear some dialogue that shows Kratos and Atreus' difference in perspective and personality, and you will learn during this intro that Kratos always kept his distance from Atreus and never went hunting with him or his wife. There are reasons for this that we'll get into later, but for now that's the extent of what we know. You'll eventually catch the deer and get your first glimpse at Atreus' reluctance to take another life, and Kratos' reluctance to show his son any affection. A troll appears right after and you're forced to fight it, which is ironic because not even 5 minutes ago Kratos said this.
You are not ready for trolls, boy.
You fight the troll, which thankfully is more concerned with kicking your ass than eating it, and Atreus loses his temper at the end and slashes at its dead body with his knife. He then goes into a coughing fit, and Kratos says that he isn't ready for their journey. This irritates Atreus, and he turns into a smartass for the rest of the trip.
Still can't get the doors open, huh?
Quiet.
Once you're back home, Kratos gathers the ashes of his wife from the pyre and heads inside to have a dad talk with his son. Atreus claims that he hasn't been sick in a long time and that he's better now. The next scene is a tad long, but it's also very important, so I'm going to let it play out. There are a lot of implications that'll be relevant much later in the game.
You want me to hit you?
I want you to try.
Ow! What are you...
Try again.
Why are you doing that?
Too slow. Try again.
Cut it out!
Weak. Again. Again.
Stop it!
Again! Your anger. You can get lost in it. The path ahead is difficult. And you, Atreus, are clearly not ready.
What was that?
Quiet.
Come on out! There's no use hiding anymore. I know who you are.
What's going on? Do you know him?
More importantly, I know what you are.
Boy, beneath the floor. Now.
But you told me never to go down there. Who is that?
I do not know.
What's he talking about?
I do not know. Get in.
Just tell me what I want to know. No need for this to get bloody. I thought you'd be bigger. But you're definitely the one. Long way from home, aren't you?
What do you want?
Oh, you already know the answer to that.
Whatever it is you seek, I do not have it. You should move on.
And here I thought your kind was supposed to be so enlightened, so much better than us, so much smarter. And yet you hide out here in the woods, like a coward.
You do not want this fight.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I do.
Leave my home.
You are going to have to kill me for that to happen.
I warned you.
Finally.
You would not listen.
my turn. How incredibly disappointing. Come on, then.
You then begin the fight, breaking trees and rocks in the process. You learn a lot during this fight with the stranger. He tells you that Odin sent him to get answers, although to what we can't say for sure. He also informs you that he can't feel any pain that you're causing him, but more importantly that he hoped Kratos, if nobody else, could cause him to. With what he said in the beginning of the cutscene, it's apparent that he is of course talking about a foreign god of war that may not follow the same rules of whatever it is in this land that's numbing him. That also explains why he seems disappointed, not disoriented like it may first appear after Kratos hits him. You get knocked into a giant ravine that was created in the struggle and climb back out for the final phase of this fight. Kratos eventually manages to snap his neck, which presumably kills him. Kratos talks out loud to himself and his dead wife, whose name was Faye, on his way back to the house. Once you're back inside, the following cutscene plays.
Boy,
There was so much. I thought. You're all right.
I am all right. Come. Gather your things. We are leaving.
Thought I wasn't ready.
You are not. We have no choice now. Prove me wrong.
Yes, sir.
When you get outside, you can see how destroyed the landscape is. Now is a good time to take it all in for something later. You travel with Atreus while Kratos lectures him on various things about their trip. There's a bit of dialogue that can be easily missed in this area. If you don't break this bucket hanging over here, then Atreus will say this.
An offering cask? Mother said Odin's disciples fill them with gifts and hang them where thieves can't reach them. That one looked really old.
Foolish.
What is? Worshipping the gods?
The gods care nothing for them. Men should not pray to monsters.
If you do, then this dialogue is missed entirely. There are several other lines of dialogue in this game that can be missed or interrupted if you move too quickly, and many more that are reactions if you do something out of order. Once you make it to the top, you can overlook the woods surrounding your home. You find out that there was a protection stave around them, and Faye handpicked which trees she wanted for her funeral pyres, so the stave was broken. That's why you ran into the Draugr and Troll while hunting with Atreus, and how that weird bearded man with a crappy mullet was able to find you. You will go through several more combat encounters before coming to a bridge. Boy shows Kratos how sturdy the boards are before promptly breaking one, causing you to fall to the area below. Ignoramus then decides to go mess with some dead Draugr that weren't very dead. Once you've dealt with them, you move on and encounter your first Revenant. You will come to a multi-stage combat encounter shortly after, which does its best to show off how annoying Revenants can be in this game. This is the only encounter in the game that I found that can be cheesed by moving to a spot where the enemies can't get you. This causes them to waddle away, waddle, until the very next day, or until you jump back across. After dealing with all the enemies, 20 minutes later in my case, then you will come to a door that has piles of dead bodies stacked out front. Inside are a group of totally normal human beings, if cannibals can be considered normal, and Kratos tells Atreus to stay back so you can brutally murder them all. Some ranged enemies start to spawn in, and normally you would move up to hit this last one. Since I'm playing on the highest difficulty, I decided not to chance getting hit, and this is what happened. These cutscenes aren't as airtight as they may seem. Atreus kills the guy who is threatening his life and then begins to cry, which is ironic because earlier he said this.
Earlier, you said people might try and rob us. I'll kill them if they try. I'm not afraid.
If we encounter them, we will stay out of it. Understand?
But I can fight.
You will stay out of it, boy. Speak no more of this.
Kratos shows compassion for the first time in the game, probably because he realizes that this is partially his fault for ignoring Atreus, and all the dead people come back to life for another round of ass whoopings. Atreus is a little out of it for a moment, and Kratos not uncaringly threatens to take him back home in order to snap him out of it. Once you're out, you get introduced to the dwarf Brock. He's having some trouble with his animal, and Atreus says that it's scared of something in the trees. There's additional dialogue if you just go AFK for a moment.
Father, throw your axe at those trees on the other side of the bridge. The ones with the white trunks. Trust me just this once. Please. The tree with the white trunk and orange leaves. Right there on the other side of the bridge.
Why isn't he throwing the axe? He broken or something?
Brock tells you that he and his brother were the ones who crafted the Leviathan axe, and Kratos doesn't believe him. He proves it by showing a brand under the grip, which he has half of because he and his brother aren't on speaking terms. You upgrade your axe and then get attacked by some Draugr. Once they're dealt with, you move on. After passing through a cave, you take another moment to take in the sights, and Kratos once again shies away from having a bonding moment with his son. You get one of your first sandball riddles, which there are dozens of in this game. Just like the rest of the puzzles, they don't require very much thought to solve. I personally would have liked to have some more challenging puzzles in this game, but that could have easily hurt the story's already poor pacing. However, this does beg the question if some challenging but interesting puzzles would really be much worse than a couple of elementary ones that serve no real purpose. I can't speak for everybody, but I would prefer a couple of good puzzles over a lot of easy ones where the answer is written on the wall somewhere. You pass through another cave and then find some boar tracks. Kratos wants Atreus to kill the boar to practice his archery, and you then run into your second troll of this game, except this time with fire. After killing it, you're free to explore this area. There's some pretty good dialogue here with some subtle nods to God of War 2.
Yeah. What does it say?
The runes symbolize the three Nornir.
Nornir.
The Fates.
The Fates. No good comes from them.
Okay.
You find the boar not too long after, but the arrow bounces off its hide when Atreus shoots it. You pass through the wreckage of an encampment where some Draugr and Hellwalkers got into a heated debate about The Last of Us 2 that ended in everybody's death. The boar is just past this giant stone that Kratos doesn't hesitate to drop behind him right before starting to whisper to Atreus. Thankfully, like most people on Twitter, this boar is deaf and stupid. Atreus denies the swine his oats and shoots it in the stomach. This works, and he drops his mother's knife while he chases after it. You lose the boy in a maze of some sort and hear somebody get real steamin' mad at him. You finally make it to him and are immediately put to work by a woman to save the boar's life. She uses magic to partially heal the wound, and it's revealed that she's a witch. This witch lives under a turtle that lives under a tree, imagine being the real estate agent for that property, and you take the boar inside to finish the healing. The witch sends Atreus out to get an ingredient needed for the ritual, but it was all an elaborate ruse to get some alone time with Kratos. Not that kind of alone time.
I know you're a god. Not of this realm, but there's no mistaking it. He doesn't know, does he? About your true nature? Or his own?
That is none of your concern.
The gods of these realms don't take kindly to outsiders, trust me. I know. When they find you, and they will, they'll make things difficult. The boy will want answers.
That will be my problem.
Whatever you're hiding, you cannot protect him forever. But you're right. Doesn't concern me.
It's important to note Kratos' reluctance to tell Atreus that he's a god. You can probably imagine several reasons why he doesn't want to, but his exact motivation is unknown at this time. You head outside to pick some flowers, which as you know is the heart of the God of War experience. Atreus is having some trouble getting the root for his ingredient, and you give him back his knife, with a stern yet gentle slap on the wrist for being a total dingus. You head back inside, and the witch gives you a protection rune on your neck to hide you from the other gods. She then shows to have taken a liking to Atreus, the legal kind of liking, and you move outside. It isn't until after you've left that she gives you a special compass, so there's an excuse to have quest markers, since we're about to move into the more open parts of the game. It's kind of odd how she tells you this without Kratos even looking at her when it could have easily been given during the cutscene. I think there's a valid explanation for this though. The scenes in this game were shot with 3D tracking on the actors involved, and the decision to have this compass must have come after they were done shooting this scene. I've seen some people criticize this for being jarring, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I think it was a result of this compass being included far later into development, so a voice line was all that was needed. Kind of a stupid thing to pause and talk about, but like I said, it is a little jarring. Once you're finished, you take a boat and head out. Atreus makes a comment about how surreal it feels to be out on a journey, and his mysterious illness comes up again. Kratos asks Atreus if his mother ever mentioned a god who could feel no pain, and Atreus says that sounds like the Aesir god Baldur. You rode to a statue and the runes on its chest say to cast your weapons into the lake. Once you do, you're introduced to the World Serpent, but what he says to you isn't known. I think it would have been cool if Santa Monica added subtitles explaining what exactly is being said in New Game Plus, similar to what Nintendo did in The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, but that's beside the point. Because the serpent shifted his weight, the water level has receded. You can now see that the statue you saw from before is at the top of a temple, and there are various beaches you can go explore if you want. Here's a nitpick that isn't important, but I still want to mention. How is this flag waving in the breeze if the water level just literally dropped? 0 out of 10, horrible game. Once you make your way to the temple, you can see Brock is already there. He gives you a fast travel stone that grants you access to the realm between realms, but you can only use it to get back to his shop, so it's only one way. He tells you not to stray from the path or you'll die, and you're actually given the option to do so anyways.
We jump.
Really? Bad idea!
It's the little things like this that make the game great, and it's the little things like the flag that make it unforgivable. You'll follow the bridge to one of the giant towers and continue your trek to the mountain. As you've traveled up until this point, there have been various subtle gameplay changes that Atreus has went through. With the first troll fight in the beginning, he was slow and got knocked out easily. As you battle the Draugr, he dodges more frequently and can fire slightly faster. At this point in time, a message appears telling you that Atreus has gained enough battle confidence to physically attack enemies, and he will almost never get knocked out anymore. I like these subtle changes because they feel organic and show some character progression through gameplay instead of dialogue. I'll go into detail in the combat analysis about how I think Atreus is the most useful AI companion I've ever seen in a game, and maybe any game ever. You'll meet your second dwarf shortly after. This is Sindri, Brock's brother, and he claims that his smithing skills are far superior to Brock's. You'll be hearing a lot of that from both dwarves, and it becomes a competition for who can prove themselves superior by working on the axe any chance they get. Whereas Brock is abrasive and vulgar, Sindri is much kinder and cleaner, and I mean cleaner in every sense of the word because he's a germaphobe. Once the introductions are out of the way, you proceed up the mountain. Atreus repeatedly asks if he can carry his mother's ashes, and Kratos declines every time.
Why? She meant more to me than you anyway.
What?
I just meant I spent more time with you. You were off hunting a lot.
It would serve you to stop talking.
An ogre will bust through the door as Kratos tries to open it, and he demonstrates his protective instincts for the first time when he doesn't hesitate to lodge his arm in the ogre's mouth to keep it from getting at Atreus. The cool thing about combat against ogres is that you can bait them into damaging other enemies in the surrounding area. Atreus will occasionally climb on one and take temporary control of it, but if you stun them, then you can use them to clear entire rooms, which makes them more useful than dangerous. Once you're through, you'll see that the path is blocked by a black fog. Atreus says that the witch could get you through, and she magically appears behind you to tell you that she can't. There's a valid reason for her suddenly appearing like this, but I still feel the need to mention the absolute convenience of her showing up at this exact moment, mere seconds after Atreus makes the comment.
Why wait to warn us?
I was busy, saving my friend, if you remember.
She tells you that the fog is a corruption of magic that she has no power to get through, but the pure light of Alfheim can. She also warns that it's not easy to obtain. You ride a monorail that Sindri was in the process of fixing back down and have a talk about the World Serpent. The witch says that he just appeared one day and Thor showed up to try and kill it. They eventually fought to a stalemate and Thor went back to Odin empty-handed. You also find out that he speaks a dead language so nobody can understand him. You make your way back to the temple while learning about various different things, most notably that the temple is referred to as Tyr's Temple, named after the god Tyr who used to keep the peace in the realms. Once you make it back, Kratos is put to work lifting heavy shit and turning the giant bridge to a different position. You know, normal stuff. You find out more about the risen dead, referred to as Hellwalkers, which are restless souls who were denied judgment and peace. As for why they are coming back to life, it isn't clear at this time. You make your way back up as Atreus subliminally calls Kratos a boomer. The witch uses the last of her bow's magic and gives the string to Atreus, saying to use the light of Alfheim on it whenever you get a chance, and that she isn't allowed to leave Midgard. She gives you a Bifrost, which can create travel between realms and hold the light of Alfheim. She also gives a long explanation about how realm travel works as the temple reawakens. All the realms live in the same physical space, but are essentially alternate dimensions or mirrors of each other. Realm travel is only possible from within this room. It is the light of Alfheim that separates these dimensions and gives the Bifrost its power. And the temple was designed to focus the light into realm travel. The actual world itself is rested on the giant tree Yggdrasil, which supplies it with life essence. It's a very detailed explanation, which is fine with me because I tend to have 1,000 questions about everything anyways. Kratos doesn't share the same sentiments, so you can get back at the witch by refusing to do what she says.
The bridge you pushed outside is currently positioned to lead to the realm of Vanaheim. Instead, turn the wheel to our actual destination, Alfheim. You must select the destination realm, Alfheim. Turn the wheel to Alfheim, please. Why isn't he listening to me?
He gets like this sometimes.
I actually discovered this Easter egg by accident on my second playthrough while I was texting somebody, and it's just one more thing I would like to appreciate about this game if I wasn't so upset about that damn flag. You get the travel rune to Alfheim and begin to travel there as the witch tells you how the tower to Jotunheim, the land of the giants, mysteriously disappeared one day and has never been found. For this reason, realm travel to Jotunheim is impossible and you will never be able to go there. Traveling to Alfheim drained the Bifrost of its remaining energy and you won't be able to leave until you replenish it. After the witch gets super sucked back into another dimension, you proceed forward. You get to witness some Dark Elves murder some Light Elves, and Kratos pulls his inner centrist and says that you don't have all the facts and shouldn't get involved, but no amount of Devil's Advocate will keep the Dark Elves from attacking you on sight. This is fine with me because I hate elves with every fiber of my being and am more than happy to cleave my way through a couple hundred of them. I would go on a tangent about the representation of elves in fantasy settings and why exactly I despise them so much, but that would probably get me cancelled on Twitter. What I will say is I dislike anything that is shamelessly pushed as pompous and morally superior to everybody else, which also extends to the Asari from Mass Effect now that I think about it. You can find Sindri in the next area, and there's a perpetual bug that prevents you from activating dialogue with him at this moment. I know it's a bug because it didn't happen on my very first playthrough, but it has ever since. This is a horribly timed bug too, because you'll probably be wondering how and why he came to a realm in the middle of a war and arrived soon enough to set up shop, all before he even knew you were coming here. As far as answers go, at least the how is explained, and the why can be probably chalked up to he was just looking for rare resources, since he does tend to get around a lot. You free the boat, and Atreus has a small aneurysm that interrupts your rowing, claiming to hear voices. But not just any voices, evil voices. You pass some Light Elves, and Kratos tells Atreus that they're not getting involved, then proceeds to lecture him about war. The crystal creating the bridge gets covered up by stuff from my search history, and you get attacked by more Dark Elves. Once you've dealt with them, you raise some statues to form a rune for the Sand Bowl puzzle. There's different dialogue depending on what you did first. In my case, I raised the rune before reading the Sand Bowl, so Atreus says this.
Wait, combined together like that, they kind of look like a rune. It doesn't make sense.
Come, back to the boat.
You then get some more insight into Faye's past.
Sindri said Mother was a warrior. Was she in a war too?
Of a sort. Her family was decimated by hostile rivals, and she alone survived. She walked the warrior's path, but her war was to live on, to brave an unforgiving world alone.
Atreus hears more voices, but this time they were asking for help. Solving the puzzle opened a giant floor under the lake, and you take the elevator ride down. He claims that he heard his mother's voice, which Kratos immediately dismisses. You fight your way through this lower level, and Atreus insists he heard Faye's voice, and Kratos continues to deny its possibility. After moving to the next area, this happens. Once again, Kratos shows how much he loves his son in the best way possible, violence. One thing I want to point out about this part is how these Dark Elves near Atreus just stand there menacingly while he keeps his bow drawn. It's like they forgot it was a 2-on-1 against a child who only has one arrow knock, so it turns into a live-action game of chess where neither side moves. All the while, Dark Elves you fight are throwing everything they have at Kratos and he just slaughters them by the troves. Kratos then collapses an entire stone fixture which nearly crushes Atreus because he waited too long to tell him to run. Thankfully, Atreus doesn't hold much of a grudge, so it's no issue. You retrieve your axe, but the Dark Elf touches you with his feet, which to me is all the motivation I need to want him dead. Being an elf and consuming oxygen is already a transgression in my eyes, but feet are gross and I will fight any man, woman, or child who says otherwise. I really should be careful when I say shit like that. You'll get a fight with your first Ancient in this area, which are probably the most laughable mini-boss due to how quickly you can melt their health bar with runic attacks. Kratos does me a favor and deletes my search history, causing the bridge above to reappear. You make your way up top and find out that the doors out front don't open, so you need to find another way in. You can now ask Sindri how he's in Alfheim, and he explains that dwarves can travel the realm between realms in ways that humans can't, so realm travel can be immediate to them. You fight your way to a tunnel where one of nature's mistakes will interrupt a conversation Kratos and Atreus were having. You can actually pause and wait for them to finish this talk before crossing the trigger point, and there is an actual ending. Kratos breaks the floor with another elf, and you find yourself in a hive full of them. Kratos begins to break down the hive by breaking several of the BDSM source points, and you get to fight every Dark Elf in this area. Thankfully, they're a low enough level to kill quickly, so fighting this many enemies at once isn't an issue. You finish destroying the hive and gain access to the light. Atreus once again says that he hears Faye inside, and Kratos tells him to stay where he is while he steps into the light to refill the Bifrost. He hands Atreus his axe and tells him to hold on to it until he gets back, and then gets pulled inside the light. Inside, you see several visions as you hear Atreus speaking. It quickly becomes apparent that he isn't speaking to Kratos, he's speaking to Faye. This is one of the last things he said to her right before the funeral, and you get to hear firsthand how he feels about Kratos and their relationship. Given how their relationship has operated up until this point, it's no surprise that it isn't very positive. Once you reach the end, Kratos sees his wife.
Faye. Wait! Come back! No! No! What have you done? Why did you do that?
I saved you! You were trapped in there! I waited and I waited, but you wouldn't come out! So I pulled you out!
Boy, I was gone only... moments.
No! You've been gone a long, long time! I didn't know what to do! You left me here! Again! Why don't you care?
That's impossible.
We should go before they come back. I hope you got what you needed.
So, as you can see by all the dead bodies, Atreus is a badass. I've seen some people criticize that it is unlikely he would be able to kill all these Dark Elves by himself. The issue with these criticisms is they haven't been paying attention to his power level. Atreus is a much, much more powerful god than Kratos will ever be. He's not just strong, he's immortal. He can take several hits from a troll without receiving critical brain damage, he's immune to the poison from the Scorn Pole, he has an infinite stock of arrows that never seem to run out, and he cannot die in combat. If you got this kid a flu vaccine, he would be unstoppable. Not even Zeus at the height of his reign would be able to keep Atreus from single-handedly overthrowing Olympus, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Doomslayer checks under his bed for Atreus every night.
I fear no man, but that thing... it scares me.
Now that I'm done being a smartass, let's get back to reality and talk about this scene. I mentioned roughly 30 seconds ago, before I detoured into personal fanfiction, how people have criticized this scene for its unlikelihood, and they're not wrong. It is hard to believe that this is possible for Atreus to pull off, but we also don't know how long Kratos was in the light. It is possible that he only needed to handle 2 or 3 elves at a given time, and that this is the result of hours of fighting. Or it's possible that another wave of level 2 Nazi zombie noob elves showed up and Atreus smacked their ass like bongo drums. The details about what exactly happened here aren't clear, but one way or another, Atreus was able to survive an onslaught of enemies in our absence. I never questioned this scene when I first saw it, because Atreus had already proven himself a capable fighter well before this, even if he is still relatively new to it. Kratos uses the light from the Bifrost to refill the bowstring's magic and give us access to light arrows. After gaining this magic ability, you are never allowed to use regular arrows again, and trust me, you're not going to miss it. You can now shoot these crystals to create light bridges. Atreus is feeling bitter because of what happened, so you get to experience some attitude for a little while.
Maybe instead of looting a sacred temple, we could just get out of here?
If I want your opinion, boy, I will ask for it.
You solve another sandball puzzle and the doors to the temple can now be opened. The Light Elves come out from wherever they were hiding, and it pains me to see that they're still alive. These bastards think they're so high and mighty that they can't even be bothered to walk around like normal people and have to flex on you by floating in like they own the place. I mean, they kinda do, but that's beside the point. The Dark Elf who touched you with his feet comes back and starts speaking German to you again. You take a newly formed elevator back below and the ceiling in the lake begins to close. You fight your way through in the dark until you get attacked by Svartalfur. I'm 90% sure that is the proper pronunciation for that name. This begins a boss fight, and it's okay. It's a little annoying how you can't get close enough to do anything to him because he'll just drop a blinding bomb every chance he gets, but it's not the worst. Once you kill him, which unfortunately you can only do once, and with the same execution you've seen 100 times by now, he tells you that you've made a grave mistake. This causes Atreus to question if they helped the wrong side. It wouldn't surprise me because the Dark Elves at least had the common courtesy to let me kill them, but the Light Elves did not. Once you're back in the boat, Atreus starts asking if his mother was in the light of Alfheim like he thought she was.
Was she in the light?
Who?
You didn't know.
No, she was not there.
Not like you would even care if she was.
Mind your tongue, boy! Until our journey is over, one of us must remain focused. Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief. Mourn how you wish. Leave me to my own.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize.
No. Why would you? Do not know my ways. I know it has not been easy. In the light, I felt only moments pass. If that is of some comfort to you.
That's good to know. Really.
And just like that, Atreus is back to his usual self. By this point, you're done with Alfheim and you're free to return to Midgard and dispel the fog blocking your way to the mountain. This is one of several points where you can take a break from the main story and explore, so I'm going to take a moment to discuss exploration in this game. There are lots of areas to explore in the Lake of Nine, and you get to hear Kratos tell some terrible stories while you row around it. I don't mean terrible as in he gives some insight into his past or some of his tragic life lessons. I mean these stories are just outright bad, or as he calls them, brief and purposeful. The stories he is telling Atreus are much shorter and much less interesting versions of Aesop's fables. For those of you who don't know who Aesop is, he was a Greek fabulist and storyteller. His most well-known story is probably The Tortoise and the Hare, or at least that's the only one of these I'd heard of before playing this game, except I didn't know he was the one who invented it. You can actually hear Kratos tell this story, and I think it's a perfect example of just how bad he is at this.
There was one that concerned a hare and a tortoise.
Like the witch's house?
Unlikely.
So what happens?
They wager on a race between them. The hare is too confident of victory and foolish, while the tortoise is steady and disciplined. The tortoise wins.
You haven't told a lot of stories, have you?
An interesting detail that I found worth sharing about these stories, other than how bad they are, is how one of them appears to hit closer to home for Kratos than he intended.
There was a horse. The horse sought vengeance upon his enemy, a stag. But he could not kill the stag alone. The horse met a man, a hunter, and made a deal. He took the man's bit and bridle and allowed him to ride in the saddle on his back. Together, they killed the stag, and the horse tasted victory. But the hunter would not release the horse and made a slave of him.
So getting revenge cost him his freedom. Hope it was worth it.
It was not.
This, of course, is not only referring to this particular fable, but also how Kratos was enslaved by Ares and lost everything in the process. It's a small detail to comment on, but what can I say? I like continuity in characters, and I enjoy finding these smaller details tucked away in seemingly unimportant dialogue. I'm not going to comment on everything like this, nor am I going to bring up every piece of dialogue between Kratos and Atreus, although by now it probably feels like I already have. Exploration isn't all good though, because there are several issues that come with it, the first of which are the presence of higher level enemies that can kill you instantly. The leveling system in this game is one of the dumbest I have ever seen in my entire life. It is entirely gear-based, not experience-based. You use experience to unlock skills and additional moves to help make encounters easier, but your level itself is based entirely on what level gear you're currently wearing. The stats in this game are borderline useless until you're already almost at the highest possible level because your damage output and defense are going to be dictated more by this number than anything else. Enemies 2 or more levels above you can kill you in a single hit, and this isn't specific to Give Me God of War. This is signified by a purple health bar. Enemies 1 level above you are easier to manage, but it can still turn into a grind fest nonetheless. I think it's a cardinal sin if anything kills you instantly in a video game, including first-person shooters. I make some exceptions with weapons that have specific limitations, like shotguns, but even snipers I believe should require a headshot to kill you instantly. The former Battlefield elitist in me cannot stand when I die from across the map without warning, and Black Ops Cold War is one of the most frustrating Call of Duty games I have ever played as a result of this. The same is true for action games, especially games with the ill-termed RPG mechanics, which just means a leveling system and a skill tree. It's not just health and damage numbers that are affected by this though, it's also the in-game mechanics as well. If a move cannot be blocked or parried, it appears with a red ring right before the attack to telegraph that you need to dodge. A yellow ring can be parried but will stagger you if you attempt to block, and no ring at all means it can be blocked without a stagger. There are some exceptions to this rule, like how a Dark Elf's bomb can't be blocked but doesn't appear with a red ring, but this is true for almost all other attacks. Fighting against multiple high-level enemies is possible, but a single slip will result in instant death. I could forgive the asinine gear-based level system if it didn't also remove two of your defensive options, especially the parry, which I use quite frequently because it staggers all enemies around you, and I had constant issues with the dodges in this game, but I'll get to that later. Logically, you would want to explore the Lake of Nine as soon as possible. You're a relatively low level and likely need hack silver and experience. There are side quests available in an entire open area with chests everywhere that may have a special talisman, axe pommel, or runic attack that will help turn the tide in your next fight. There were numerous times that I, somebody who has played this game 4 or 5 times now, had to stop exploring and gathering resources because of the enemies that would spawn in. This isn't as bad after Alfheim as it is during your next trip to the lake, but it still shows a problem in this game's design. The developers wanted you to explore these islands, find the chests, kill Odin's ravens, and do all the collectible time killers that they put in the Lake of Nine, but they also put enemies in these areas that you can't fight right now. The obvious rebuttal to this criticism is going to be get good, but I really don't like that argument because it implies that the developers don't need to properly design their fights and that the burden is on the player to overcome the bullshit. I beat this fight just fine, but that doesn't mean instant death is a fair punishment if I would have dodged at the wrong time and gotten hit. This problem has a number of easy fixes other than designing a leveling system that isn't tethered to gear and doesn't effectively break combat. For one, you could have enemies scale with your level. As it stands, enemies scale with the point of the story you're in and whether or not you've already cleared an area. There's some moments where I would be returning to an area I've already cleared to open a chest that was inaccessible beforehand and be greeted with level 7 or 8 enemies when I was only level 6, and I decided to simply reload a checkpoint and move on, then deal with the headache. Health and damage numbers are already altered by the game's difficulty, and Give Me God of War mode gives enemies the ability to level up in the middle of combat, which is also broken because some enemies can level up instantly without any chance to interrupt them. So keeping enemies no more than one level ahead of you wouldn't butcher the challenge. I can accept that Realm Tear encounters have high level enemies since it is a mid to end game task that you can ignore altogether, but basic exploration shouldn't have things that can kill you instantly. Another easy solution would be to simply change how high level enemies operate to better suit the combat system. Parrying is a legitimate tool in an action combat system and should not be revoked without good reason. In For Honor, back before Ubisoft packed it with microtransactions then discarded its lifeless corpse, you could always parry an unblockable attack. It rewarded you for having quick reflexes but would punish you if you missed your timing or had bad connection. There needs to be a third type of attack with a different colored indicator that can be parried but cannot be blocked. Not that blocking it will stagger you, that missing your parry will result in a hit. With this one rework and the removal of instant death, you have turned these high-level encounters from glorified no-hit runs to a legitimately challenging battle that complements the combat system in this game, which is ironically exactly how it works for anything that doesn't cross the insta-kill threshold. Now you can explore and clear these areas without the threat of hitting a brick wall, but I even think that the changes would benefit the entire game, not just the exploration sections. Now that large critique section number 1 is out of the way, let's get back to the main story. With the Bifrost replenished, you are now able to dispel the fog in the mountain. You can ride the monorail back up, and Atreus asks if he can carry Faye's ashes, to which Kratos once again says no. Using the light of the Bifrost to cut through the fog, you slowly make your way up the path. This is one of many unskippable walking sequences in the game, which personally don't bother me, but might feel like a colossal waste of time to somebody else. From the time you start walking through the fog, it takes a full 60 seconds before you can actually move freely. You can't do anything during the sequence except hold the analog stick forward and wait for it to be over. After a 30-second climbing section, you then need to move through more of the black fog, which takes roughly another 20 seconds to get through. Altogether, this section takes just shy of 2 minutes of nothing but walking and listening to some dialogue. Again, this isn't something that bothers me. Non-stop combat can start to feel fatiguing if you're not given some downtime, but I think there are better ways to go about it than sections with nothing but slowly walking or climbing. At the same time, the amount of traversal in this game does give the impression of you actually scaling a mountain, so maybe this is an issue that doesn't really need a solution. Your first time playing, this may not even be considered an issue at all, but on subsequent playthroughs, you might feel like you're being bogged down by the amount of walking. And by the time you know almost all the dialogue, there's no longer anything interesting to listen to as you play. I'll let you guys decide if this is something that even needs addressing, because I have a feeling that everyone's opinion is going to be different on the subject. I've heard some very harsh criticism on this topic from some critics that I have a lot of respect for, and they do have a lot of valid points, but I find it difficult to go so hard on something that I can't even be for sure is a problem in the first place. I thought you guys should at least know that I acknowledge this as a valid criticism for some people, even if I don't have an issue with it myself. You make your way into the mountain, which has a designated path that was built by the giants. Once you've traveled for a while, you will eventually come to a mine that has a giant claw that will take you closer to the peak. Atreus attempts to operate it, which causes the counterweight to collapse and get trapped under a couple tons of rubble. The impact was strong enough to break open a block path and some Draugr come running out. You can find Brock not too long after. If it seems weird that the dwarves just keep conveniently appearing where you're at, there are at least half explanations for it.
You had a way around the Black Breath all along?
Now don't go thinking I could have gotten you past it, you big sack of meat. I got ways around most everything, especially up here.
It is still a coincidence that you keep bumping into each other, but I appreciate Santa Monica for not relying on video game logic alone. It's necessary to have a shop every few areas so you have a chance to sell your collectibles and upgrade your gear, although it can start to feel like they have some magical map that marks everywhere you've been so they can end up somewhere ahead of you.
It feels like somebody wants to sell me something!
I told you he was on to us!
In this area, you'll find a loot worm, which is like a baby Tetzel worm. This is the only one in the entire game from what I found, and I have explored every single area multiple times over the course of these playthroughs. The worm will burrow and become invincible while doing so if you aim at it, so you need Atreus to shoot it without aiming. I may just be stupid or something, but I only worked this out for myself one time, and it was not on this latest playthrough. I would have liked to see more loot worms in the game, maybe in some hard to find hidden areas. You could build entire puzzles around them with creative ways to kill a loot worm without it suspecting it. The first one could die to arrows, but maybe there's another one in a pond and it swims around too quickly for Atreus to shoot it, so you have to freeze it with the axe to kill it. Or maybe there's a worm that can't burrow but it's agile enough to dodge axe throws and arrows, so you need to set up an elaborate mousetrap style contraption to corner it so Atreus can get an arrow hit. Things like that. These aren't very good ideas, but I think it shows that more could be done with this that would add some variety of how you get valuable items besides just treasure maps and Nornir chests. It's likely that there were some loot worm puzzles planned, but they got scrapped due to time, or maybe this really is the only one and they had no intentions to do anything with it. I hope that isn't the case, because the find the rune puzzles get stale very quickly and the sand bowls aren't very intuitive as it is. The game is sorely lacking some unique puzzles where the answer isn't about freezing a gear with your axe. I get that not everybody likes puzzles, but I think there would be a better use of my downtime than walking through black fog for a full minute. Loot worm puzzles aren't even something I realized I needed until I wrote this paragraph, and I think that's a testament to how little variety there is in the moment-to-moment gameplay. You're either walking, climbing, fighting, or doing basic puzzles that can usually be solved by looking around. The game feels very on rails in this capacity, and I think it needs something to help break up the monotony. I probably wouldn't feel this way if there were more bosses, but that's a conversation for later. Anyways, you push this cart back to the main chamber where you started and use it to climb to a higher platform you couldn't reach before so you can free the counterweight. Once you do, you'll need to fight another troll, which only rubs salt in the wound of the last point, doesn't it? Once it's dead, you can lower the claw onto the cart and use it to ride further up the mountain. It doesn't take you all the way to the peak, but it gets you much closer. Atreus finds a sky lantern that the giants use for their prayers, and Kratos gets a chance to have a slight bonding moment with his son. By this point in the story, they're starting to warm up to each other a little bit more, which means Kratos isn't afraid to show the tiniest amount of physical affection like he was in the beginning. You'll start to run into some traps made by the giants by this point, which have small paths around that only Atreus can fit through. This is explained as the dwarves carving passageways for themselves so they didn't have to deal with them. There's another lift not too long after that will take you to the peak of the mountain. You'll get attacked by some Draugr during this trip and get some dialogue afterwards that ties back to something Atreus said in the very beginning of the game.
Father, after we scatter Mother's ashes, what then? What comes next?
Nothing comes next. We go home.
That's it? The adventure is over?
For now. But we will have much to do. You were right earlier on the boat after cutting down the last tree. You said it felt like something had changed. And it has. And our home is no longer safe. But it will be again. And we must continue your trading.
Okay.
Atreus does that video game thing where he challenges Murphy's Law just before catastrophe strikes, and it makes an appearance in the form of a dragon that wants nothing more than to be a big epic boss fight. Should I talk about how stupid this fight is? I think I should talk about how stupid this fight is. The dragon's attacks are perfectly telegraphed so you know what's about to happen, but they're not perfectly timed. If you stand on the left of the platform, then it'll take a swipe at you. If you stand on the right, then it'll try to bite you. I've never gotten through this part without taking damage, which was never an issue because it's always been a low-level battle, and the damage output was negligible. On Give Me God of War, that's not exactly the case. From the time the telegraph begins to when the attack lands, you don't have enough time to get out of the way without getting hit. This is made even worse because some of the attacks cannot be interrupted once they've been started, so if you dodge forwards and try to do an attack quickly but you have the ability that causes you to do a spin attack, you cannot quit in the middle. You need to wait for Kratos to finish roleplaying as a ballerina of death and then dodge, or you get hit. I'll talk more about this in my combat analysis, which will be roughly at the halfway point of the story, but just know that you can't always dodge or roll out of an attack. This dragon attack needs an extra half second to get out of the way, considering you can take 2 or 3 rolls to get to the safe side of the lift. Except, you probably aren't supposed to dodge this attack at all. I looked up some no damage runs on this boss, and it turns out that this attack can be blocked. This is a little ridiculous because a bite from a dragon can be blocked, but a jab from a troll or a dark elf's blinding bomb cannot. This isn't just inconsistent, it's asinine. I'll admit I'm probably just stupid for not trying it, but there is no indication that this attack can be blocked when countless others that are much smaller and should be blockable are not. Again, I'll let you guys decide if I'm just stupid. After damaging its claws enough, it'll knock away your lift and cause it to get stuck. Kratos launches it at the dragon's face, which causes it to run off, but its tail pulls the lift into a cave with it. You get a tutorial on using sap from the Yggdrasil tree that blows up when it comes in contact with electricity, which the dragons breathe. You find the dragon further up terrorizing Sindri, which kind of rubs salt in the dwarves are always ahead of you issue, doesn't it? Atreus insists on helping Sindri, and for once Kratos doesn't outright reject his proposal.
Can you kill something that big?
If we can catch it off balance.
Kratos jumps on top of the dragon and quickly realizes that stabbing it is going to have no effect. It quickly becomes apparent that the dragon possesses a Poltergeist 3000, so Kratos shoves Atreus aside and jumps in its mouth. You slice at its tongue while it carries you away. As you can imagine, you're not actually steering it in this part because only a Shimada can control the dragons, but it makes me wonder why it doesn't just activate its hidden Tesla coils and blast Kratos with an unavoidable wave of electricity. Instead, it just lets him repeatedly cut up the inside of its mouth while riding it like a masochistic taxi driver. Once you step out, the real fight begins, and if you're expecting an epic battle, then you're going to be sorely disappointed because this dragon operates like a cheap ride at the state fair. I like this fight for its spectacle, but that's just about all it has going for it. The dragon could body slam Kratos and kill him instantly. Not much is known about dragons in this game, but if it has any sort of intelligence like the trolls or ogres, then it could easily outmaneuver and overpower Kratos with its sheer size and strength. If it's just another wild animal like wolves or tatzelworms, then it should be on this arena flailing and stomping, trying to kill the thing that just almost sliced its tongue in half. This could be a much cooler Vicar Amelia, but instead is demoted to a bed of chaos, except unlike that boss, this one isn't complete and utter bullshit. The dragon will either do a simple stomp or swipe attack, or it will hang back and shoot lightning at you. When it does, you grab some crystal tree sap and throw it at its head. Do this enough times and you'll stun it and are free to run up to the exposed spot and start hitting it for damage. When it wakes up, it will butt you with its head and then walk across the arena. Do this enough times and Kratos will tell Atreus to lower the claw when he gives the signal. Once you do enough damage, although not the entire health bar, you can give Atreus the signal. It's actually interesting how the game doesn't always make you deplete the entire health bar. It's odd that you don't need to, but in this boss's case, that would insinuate that Kratos can by himself do enough damage to kill this dragon just by hitting this exposed spot on its head. The same can be said for the fight with the stranger in the beginning. They use the health bar in creative ways. Atreus lowers the claw by shooting it with an arrow, and Kratos actually jumps off the ground for the first time in this entire game. I'm willing to excuse how boring this fight is, simply because of how epic this kill scene is, but I still wish that there was a lot more to fight itself than just throwing plot devices at the dragon until it eventually goes to sleep, then hitting its soft spot with your axe. I do like how Kratos watches the dragon as it falls in front of him. It shows that he learned his lesson from God of War 2, even if that wasn't actually intended.
Do you see, gods of Olympus? Do you need more proof than this?
Sindri rewards Kratos for saving his life despite his denial that he actually tried to help him, probably because he didn't want to put off the impression that he suddenly turned altruist, and you're given some mistletoe arrows. Whenever the squad doesn't seem impressed, he uses his dragon tooth to give Atreus arrows a lightning power-up. This is the only other magical arrow type in the game, which is fine because these and the light arrows are all you need to get through any encounter. You can upgrade the lightning arrows to arc between enemies and immobilize them, which is useful for dealing with multiple nightmares, and you can upgrade the light arrows to inflict stun damage and a weaken debuff. You can also shoot the crystal sap to cause it to explode, similar to how the light arrows can create light bridges. You can also seamlessly switch arrows in combat, although I usually end up using lightning arrows unless I need to inflict more stun damage or I only want to hit a single target. Finally, you make it to the summit, and you can see the peak in the distance. Kratos notices that Atreus' quiver strap is broke, so he uses the head of a mistletoe arrow to fix it. You can hear people talking while you approach the peak and can see that the stranger from the beginning of the game is still alive, accompanied by Thor's sons, Magni and Modi. The stranger, who turns out to be Baldur, is interrogating somebody at the peak of the mountain about where Kratos is at. Once you make it to the top, Baldur and the dipsticks are gone and you meet Mimir, the smartest man alive. He immediately recognizes that Kratos is a god and that Atreus doesn't know, and he tells you that the highest peak in the realms isn't here in Midgard, it's in Jotunheim. The realm bridge at the top of the mountain is the only way to reach Jotunheim, but you can't access it without a secret rune that they buried before they disappeared from Midgard. Mimir tells you that he can help you find it, but he can't leave the tree he's imprisoned in, and no weapons can destroy it. I like how Atreus just immediately starts cutting away at it to make sure. It's a nice detail. I don't know a lot about Norse mythology, but from how it's described in this game, he appears to be the Norse equivalent of Prometheus from Greek mythology. He says that you need to cut off his head and get somebody who knows the old magic to reanimate him.
Very well.
Oh, I can't watch this.
Brother, in case you can't resurrect me, there's something you need to know. The boy, the longer you wait to tell him his true nature, the more damage you do. He will resent you, and you may lose him forever.
There's much about me I would not have him know.
So you value your privacy more than your son, eh?
I'm going to cut off your head now.
Fair enough.
With Mimir's head safely secured to your belt, you fast travel to Brock's shop. Once you arrive, Atreus tells him how you ran into Sindri again. Just a quick fun fact, Brock is actually eating his pack mule from the beginning of the game. You can ask him about it later.
Hey, where's your beast of burden?
What do you mean? I ate her. Fat bits of her out just a while ago.
After you're done speaking with him, you take a boat back to the witch's cave and ride the elevator up to the top. You head inside to speak with her, and she freaks out the second she sees the mistletoe arrows. She tells you that they're wicked and that you need to destroy any more that you find. You take her regular boring arrows instead and proceed with reviving Mimir. I think the rest of this I should just play out.
Now, what's this about a head? Do you have any idea who this is? Did you kill him?
At his request. He claimed you could revive him.
Me? Are you sure you heard him right?
Please?
Take him to the table. Pamela. It's been a long time since I've practiced the old magic. Hold him there. Let's have a look. Well, thankfully his head hasn't decayed much and his brain is still intact. Nice clean cut. Cutting off his head of all people. I sure hope you know what you're doing. Now, hold his head under the water and don't let go. I mean it. That's enough.
It worked!
Let me see him. Mimir? You there?
Yes.
Good.
Oh. Hello, Freya. Been a long time. You look well.
What I did for them. As far as I'm concerned, death suits you better.
I'd bow if I could, your majesty. Forgive me. Had I known the witch in the woods was Freya herself, I never would have suggested this.
Freya? The goddess Freya?
You didn't know either? Sorry.
When word gets out that Mimir is free, the wrath of Odin won't be far behind.
You are God.
Leader of the Vanir, once yes, but no longer.
You did not think it important to tell me.
Are you really going to lecture me about that?
We are leaving, boy.
But...
Now.
You're welcome.
Why did you do that?
We cannot trust her.
Because she's a god?
Have I taught you nothing, boy?
But she's helped us a lot.
She lied.
Some people value their privacy. Best not to judge, brother.
When I require your counsel head, I will ask.
Fair enough.
As you're on your way out, Kratos asks Mimir if Baldur has a weakness, and he says this.
He claims nothing harms him.
Aye, Baldur is blessed with invulnerability to all threats, physical or magical.
Boasting of a god. Everyone has a weakness.
Not him, I'm afraid. Baldur is blessed with invulnerability to all threats, physical or magical.
You just said that, Mimir.
Did I?
What is the source of this power?
Well, as I recall, it involved, a spell?
Mimir?
Parts of my brain must still be coming back to life. Just need a moment to finish waking up.
Once you make it back to Tyr's temple, you blow a horn outside and summon the World Serpent so Mimir can ask him about how to get to Jotunheim. Whenever he wakes up, he eats the giant statue of Thor because he got tired of looking at it. Mimir accidentally tells the serpent that you're friends of Odin, which almost starts a boss battle. He quickly corrects his mistake before you get Steve Irwin and finds out what you need to get to Jotunheim. You need to learn the secret travel rune and use a magic chisel to carve it into the gateway at the peak of the mountain. The giants made sure that no regular chisel would work, so you need to get that first. Calling the serpent once again lowers the water level so you can explore more areas. Now that you have Mimir, he can tell you some actual stories about various lore markers you find while exploring, as well as why Freya is so hostile to him. Long story short, the Vanir were at war with the Aesir, and Mimir brokered a treaty that resulted in Freya marrying Odin. Over time, Odin gained her trust and got her to teach him to use Vanir magic. Whenever she finally decided she'd had enough of his bullshit and decided to leave, he stripped her of her warrior spirit, effectively removing her physical ability to harm anything, and put a spell on her to where she can't leave Midgard. These spells were specifically designed to operate within her weaknesses, so she has no capability of breaking them. My question is that if she can't hurt anything, then why does she carry a sword around unless it's just a deterrent? I guess it's just to put off the impression that she isn't defenseless. So, since she's been stripped of her freedom and her dignity, she took her first opportunity to do this.
Oh.
Mimir's a pretty cool dude, and he thinks that Freya is perfectly justified in her feelings, and he wishes he had never put her through all that to begin with. You travel by boat to where you can find the chisel as Mimir tells a story about a giant named Thamur. He was a giant in every sense of the word and was killed by Thor after his son stormed off when an argument that they had got physical, and he was trying to find him. The speed of your boat is throttled slightly during the story, so it ends right before you see the giant's corpse. It's a creative way to make sure that you don't accidentally cut off dialogue like you can in other games if you move at a reasonable pace. Since Thamur was a frost giant, he froze a fishing settlement that he fell on with his dying breath, which is a cruel twist of irony considering that the settlers were devout worshippers of the Vanir god of the north wind, Njord. I would like to point out some subtle attention to detail with the giant. If you throw your axe at his fleshy parts, then it makes a soft thud sound, but if you throw it at its eyes, then it makes a harder stone sound since they're frozen. It's a very, very small thing to notice, but somebody took the time and effort to design this when they didn't need to, just like the AFK dialogue. You make your way to a large sheet of ice with the chisel in view below it. Sindri makes another appearance after you finish mopping the floor with a couple of ogres, and he demonstrates his ability to turn invisible by stepping into the realm between realms, which he learned the hard way doesn't work on dragons. He works on the axe again, you reward him by nearly destroying everything he knows and loves.
Careful! My shop's right here!
You climb your way to the giant hammer, removing the straps as you go along, and use a sand bowl to raise the platform as enemies spawn in. Mimir explains how the magic works, that it's essentially controlling time but doesn't stop the rest of the world from moving, and you jump off at the last minute whenever an enemy destroys the sand bowl. I took up my frustration on how these Draugr managed to be a slight inconvenience by murdering a small animal. After feeling satisfied, you can push the giant hammer off the ledge that it rested on after removing the straps from before and ride it to the bottom, crushing the sheet of ice in the process. I always mistake this cutscene for a QuickTime event because stopping this hammer from crushing you seems like a classic God of War button mash moment, but no, it's just a short movie. You hear Magni and Modi speaking as you climb around and will eventually loop around to the chisel.
Hurry, brother. We may get a piece of the chisel and be gone before they even notice.
After your introductions, you get a chance to fight them. This is one of my favorite boss fights in the game for various reasons. For starters, what I said in my last video still applies. I like duel style fights with little randomness that have you learning and reacting to enemy moves and then responding accordingly. The fight against Boulder technically classifies, but he stays at a distance too long for you to really get into a methodical back and forth. I also like this boss because it's an actual battle and not a stand back here and throw stuff until you're allowed to attack style boss fight. This fight took me multiple tries, but I didn't have very many moments that I thought were bullshit. I was just glad that there were checkpoints every so often so I didn't need to restart the entire encounter. That being said, there is one big problem with this fight, the interruptions. If you manage to fill Magni or Modi's stun meter, then they will be down and out until it depletes. Stun them both at once, and they do a blinding attack that puts you in a defensive mode while they taunt you. All you can do is move around in a circle as you wait for them to appear so you can block their attacks. This happens twice, and it only serves to slow down the fight. I think it would have been much more interesting if the fog layer is still present during this stage and the fight continues with low visibility. There are plot reasons for this part of the fight, since Atreus gets increasingly frustrated with their taunts, but there isn't so much dialogue that they couldn't fit it into the regular fight. Another issue is a move that Magni has where he holds his sword above his head for a highly damaging, unblockable AoE. The only solutions I've found for this were either to stun him with a runic attack or run away. If he's in the middle of the arena, there's nowhere to run. What confuses me about this is that when travelers do something similar, all you need to do is hit their trophy with the axe to cancel it. Whenever Magni does it, hitting his hands with the axe Whenever Magni does it, hitting his hands with the axe counts as a weak spot and gives the axe a bonus, but doesn't stop the attack. Good luck getting away in time if you try this. Throwing your axe at Modi when he's in the air for a massive AoE blast stops him, so there's no reason it shouldn't work for Magni too. It's possible you could run up and attack him until his poise breaks, but I didn't try this while playing. It's also possible that this is only an issue on Give Me God of War because enemies are more resistant against stuns via axe throws, which is something seen with the Valkyries as well. As the fight goes on, Atreus will get increasingly frustrated by their insults. Kratos will tell him to ignore them multiple times, but the insults about Faye constantly get under his skin. It's hard to blame him for this considering that her funeral was literally earlier that morning, but it gets to him nonetheless. The end of the fight results in Kratos killing Magni by cleaving him in the face with the axe. Modi runs off and Atreus starts coughing blood. Losing control of his emotions during the fight caused his fever to return, but he claims he's alright and refuses to get help about it. He toughs it out like an absolute unit and you retrieve a shard of the giant chisel. You can use this chisel to open all the giant blue locks on doors that you've been seeing up until this point. Mimir warns Kratos that killing Thor's son has made him a target.
Since when can you kill a god?
You proceed onward and Atreus mentions how Magni didn't come back as a Hellwalker after he died. Mimir explains that the Aesir have always found their own way to Valhalla, so they don't need assistance from the Valkyries, and they don't need to go through Helheim. Because of this, Magni's soul didn't become restless and find its way back to his body. After solving a stupid puzzle that has dozens of solutions except the one Kratos chose, you make it back to the beginning of the level. Atreus starts feeling better, and Mimir says he knows where the secret rune to Jotunheim might be. The serpent told him that the giants entrusted the rune to Tyr, so you need to go to his hidden vault beneath the temple to look for it. You head inside the vault by breaking the lock with the chisel, and Atreus tells Kratos that he wants to teach him how to read as a way of giving back for everything that Kratos has taught him so far. Before he can begin, Modi shows up and tries to kill Kratos. He's more upset about his reputation in Asgard taking a hit than he is the fact that his brother is dead, and Atreus tries to stop him by shooting a lightning-infused arrow, which Modi uses to double down on electrocuting Kratos. Thank you, Kanye. Very cool. Once again, it isn't until he insults Faye that Atreus loses it and charges him. Modi gives him the Lev versus garage door treatment and says he's basically abducting him when he's done killing Kratos. This causes him to channel his inner Spartan rage, but he's a noob so it just knocks him unconscious. You're all kinds of useful today, aren't you, boy? Kratos manages to once again defy the laws of nature and send Modi running, and he could have killed him if Atreus wasn't unconscious on the floor. Kratos decides to take Atreus to Freya because there's nobody else he can turn to, so you carry Atreus to a boat and head that way. The sky turns red and clouds begin to swirl over what appears to be Kratos' house. Mimir says that the sickness is a confliction in Atreus' mind that is representing itself as an ailment of the body, but he's only ever seen it in mortals. Since Atreus thinks he's immortal, it is much worse than it otherwise would be. This explanation never made a lot of sense to me, but I imagine it's similar to the physical effects on your health that come from an abundance of stress. Somebody calls the world serpent while you're in the elevator, which raises you to the top so slowly that Kratos is near hyperventilating while he anxiously paces until you reach the top. This is a man who has already lost his wife and child once, and here he is mere hours after his second wife's funeral and his son is dying in his arms, and he knows it's his fault. This is one of a handful of times that we see Kratos truly vulnerable and afraid in the entire franchise. Kratos' fears and anxieties are perfectly symbolized in the unsettling music that plays as you carry Atreus to Freya's.
Freya! Open the door! We need your help! Woman, do you hear me? It is urgent!
I'm still a god. Go away.
The boy has fallen ill! Freya! He is ill.
Inside. This is no ordinary illness. The boy's true nature, your true nature, fights within him.
I did this to him. Will you help me?
Of course. There is a rare ingredient found only in Helheim. The keeper that protects the Bridge of the Damned. I need its heart.
Hell.
The realm of the dead. Do you know it?
Not this one.
It is a land of unyielding cold. Fires cannot burn there, and no magic in all the 9 realms can create a blaze. As for the dead, your frost axe will be useless. You'll need to find something else.
Then I must return home. Dig up a past I swore would stay buried.
Who you were before doesn't matter. This boy is not your past, he is your son. And he needs his father. This rune opens the bridge to Helheim. When you are there, do not under any circumstances cross the Bridge of the Damned. There is no road back. Understand?
Boy.
Himalay. You must hurry. Through my garden there's a path leading to my boat. Take it. Return home. Dig up your past. Do whatever you need to do. Just bring me back the Bridgekeeper's heart. And your son may survive.
Freya. When last we spoke, I was...
No. You were right to distrust the word of a god. No need to explain. Not to me, not for that. I will keep him safe. That's a mother's promise.
As Kratos sits in silence, contemplating what he's about to do, you get a visit from Athena. Once you make it to your house, you're attacked by Hellwalkers. There's a reason for this that I'll get back to in a moment, but coming up is the best moment in the entire game, so I will let it play out first.
There's nowhere you can hide, Spartan. Put as much distance between you and the truth as you want. It changes nothing. Pretend to be everything you are not. Teacher, husband, father. But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
I'm going to temporarily suspend my criticism for this scene for about 5 minutes, because I would much rather talk about everything it does right first, and trust me, there's a moment to bring it all up later. This scene is meticulously set up right after the boulder fight. Whenever Kratos goes to shut the trapdoor, he glances down at the Blades of Chaos for less than a full second before shutting the door. I never noticed that until after I finished my recording session, where I went back to the beginning of the game to get new footage after the audio glitched out in my first recording. That would have been my 5th or 6th time doing that section, and I never noticed that Kratos hesitates to check and make sure Atreus didn't find his blades. He had them the whole time, but he would have died before revealing his monstrous past to his son. It isn't until Atreus is dying, a more than worst case scenario for Kratos, that he decides it's time to dig up his past. His own shame and regrets are worth nothing compared to his son's life, and it's at this moment that anybody doubting if Kratos cares at all are shown just how deeply he loves Atreus. Athena showing up to taunt Kratos also shows what lurks in the back of his mind. It's no coincidence that she stands in the same spot where Kratos does when the camera breaks to follow Atreus in the intro. What Atreus sees is a shadowy figure that he knows next to nothing about, and we are being shown exactly what the source of that darkness is. I believe that Athena is projecting herself to Kratos and that this is not just in his head, but the scene would work both ways regardless. On one hand, Athena is here to physically represent Kratos' past mistakes, and on the other, she is a form of his deepest emotions and regrets, and the first thing that comes to his mind when he thinks of who he really is. Except now, it's different. Kratos is done hiding, and he's accepted to stop running from the truth. He's still a monster, but he's no longer subject to somebody else's manipulation. This is also a strong moment in gameplay. There are many types of Hellwalkers that are immune to the axe, and it has a limited range. Its capacity to hit multiple targets at once are limited, and it has next to no crowd control capabilities outside of runic attacks. The blades are much more fluid and have a larger reach, which makes hitting multiple enemies much easier even if it has lower single target damage. These rusty, worn out blades already have more potential than the axe for fighting in groups, and they feel immediately familiar to anybody who has played the previous games. You take a realm portal to Brock's shop, and Mimir tries to talk to Kratos about what he saw because Athena wasn't revealing herself to him. This could also mean that it really was a figment of his imagination or an illusion of some kind, but it's never specified. Brock stops you once you arrive to ask about the blades. He learns that Atreus is sick and makes this comment when Kratos says it is his personal responsibility to fix the mess he created.
We all gotta take responsibility sometime, huh?
Once you travel to Helheim, Mimir warns that not even Odin can survive the cold, and that if the blades don't work, then he'll be dead. He also comments on the amount of souls that are present on the Bridge of the Damned, and that hell is overflowing, which is why there are so many Hellwalkers in Midgard. Kratos asks how the men in the beginning became Hellwalkers so quickly, and Mimir explains that time flows differently between realms. He also tells you that usually those who die in battle go to Valhalla, which is part of Asgard. Those who die dishonorably, like the sick and the elderly, go to Hell. You finally make it to the Bridgekeeper, and are you freaking kidding me? Alright, before we get into the blatant disrespect that is this boss fight, let's back all the way up and talk about everything that I skipped over before. Kratos puts the chains over his bandages in the cutscene, and his bracers magically reappear when he starts walking towards Athena. The landscape has magically repaired itself from the Baldur fight, trees have replanted, and everything is just fine. Freya says that the axe won't work in Helheim, but guess what? The axe works in Helheim. The number one reason that we needed the blades was so we could kill things here, and the axe still works on anything that isn't a special Hellwalker. How does something that basic go unnoticed? Thankfully, it doesn't work on the Bridgekeeper, but still. I'm in the minority of people who enjoy the troll fights in this game. I don't think there are too many of them. I'd say that there are just enough. I would like more variety between them than just elemental damage, but I don't mind them overall. The main issue in this game isn't that there are too many trolls, as people have said, but that the trolls are taking up such a large percent of the boss and mini-boss encounters. Imagine real quick that you're playing God of War 3, and whenever you get to the Scorpion boss, it's just a troll. The issue isn't that you have to fight a troll, it's the lost potential for this area to end with a unique boss that doesn't appear anywhere else. I haven't had a very big problem with the trolls in this game until this fight. I'm going to preface my criticism with this. I know that this fight only exists because the game was rushed and they didn't have enough time to implement a real boss, but I still can't help but emulate the sheer disappointment that came from this moment. The boss has the most varied moveset out of all the trolls in this game, and it has the ability to call in adds, although that's more to the fight's detriment. His ground pound ability can be ignored in its entirety if you just run on the right side of the arena, and there's very little variation other than those handful of special abilities. Everything leading up to this point has been amazing. Not perfect, but Kratos' talk with Freya and Athena still manages to get me after 2.5 years of release. I don't think there's going to be a day where those parts feel stale. This should have been a moment with a Lovecraftian abomination that freezes everything it breathes on, scale the camera back to look like God of War 3, and let you destroy this thing. It would have been the perfect way to say Kratos is back and he's better than ever. I don't want to fight another uninteresting troll that has the exact same scream as every other troll in this game. I want some true nightmare fuel that brings back the old school QuickTime events that makes my dick grow 6 inches when I'm done fighting it. Although that would probably be an awkward side effect for any ladies who play this game. After killing the letdown and borrowing his heart, Kratos sees a vision of Zeus, which makes me about 2 or 3% less angry about the sequence. Mimir tells him that it's just an illusion and that hell uses these to torture its inhabitants with their past sins. You make your way back and get interrupted by Brock, who takes the blades from you to upgrade them so they can contain the winds of hell. I knew he teleported behind this pillar, so I wanted to see what happens if you watch him leave. He just instant transmissions into the night. Mimir mentions his shock that Zeus was Kratos' father on the way back to Tyr's temple, and he finally figures it out whenever you're traveling back to Midgard.
I'm dangling from the hip of the bloody ghost of Sparta!
Kratos tells Mimir not to say anything to Atreus, but he argues that Kratos' hatred for the gods subconsciously flows over to his son and that he will never be whole without the truth. Kratos insists that he keep it a secret, and he concedes. On your way back, Brock was able to use some of the winds of hell to improve the fast travel system to be 2-way instead of just 1-way, so you use that to get back to Freya. When you arrive, Kratos gives her the heart and she tells him that she can help break the fever, but Atreus won't fully recover until he tells him that he's a god. If you decide to stay for a little while after Atreus wakes up, he'll talk to Freya about a couple of things, including how Odin cursed her to remain in Midgard specifically to prevent her from returning to Vanaheim and making amends with the Vanir who felt that her marriage was a betrayal. Once you've heard enough, you leave. Atreus seems out of it compared to usual, and you can see that the boat has been washed ashore, which is evidence that somebody really did call the Serpent earlier before your trip to Helheim. Who exactly it is will remain unknown for the entire game, which means it's something being set up for the sequel. When Kratos grabs the boat, he remarks that Atreus has been quiet and asks if he's feeling well. Atreus overheard Kratos tell Freya that he's cursed and interpreted it as Kratos calling him weak. After hearing his son's insecurity firsthand, his resolve finally breaks and he tells Atreus the truth.
I'm a god, boy. From another land far from here. When I came to these shores, I chose to live as a man. But the truth is, I was born a god. And so were you.
Kratos explains to Atreus that when he said he was cursed, he was referring to the difficulties and tragedy that come with the responsibility of being a god, and he never told him because he wanted to spare him the pain. To Atreus, this revelation explains why he can hear voices and understand languages so well. There is one more thing I'd like to talk about before I go into my combat section, and it's a bit of dialogue that I have never seen in this game. Shout out to Blair for posting this conversation on YouTube. I talked with them in the comments, and they also said they haven't been able to trigger this dialogue since, so I think it's just bugged to shit.
Look, don't be mad, but I've seen those blades of yours before. They were under the house when I was hiding. Is that why you never let me down there? Where did they come from?
They are my burden, from a life that is behind me.
Well, they're in my life too now, and I'd like to hear that story.
Those days are dead. To relive them is needless.
How can it be needless if it's the truth?
One day, you will understand.
I'll take your word for it.
This conversation is interesting because it confirms that Atreus always knew that Kratos was hiding something but never pushed him about it, and that he was smart enough to put the blades back where he found them so Kratos wouldn't find out. With Atreus recovered and the Blades of Chaos in hand, let's get into that combat section. My first impressions of this game's combat system were very, very wrong. I was satisfied with my original analysis, but something was gnawing at me, telling me to go back into the game and try again. Maybe it was the people on Reddit calling me a dumbass and that the combat system in this game is great, or maybe it was me rewatching the footage while making this video and realizing that I was playing a lot more defensively than I originally thought. Regardless, I decided to boot the game back up and reevaluate the combat, and I'm very glad that I did because my biggest argument was completely wrong. Originally, I thought that the combat in this game was too shallow, or as I called it, segmented. I explained that most of the moves in this game can't be interrupted once started, and therefore can't be relied on while playing on a difficulty as high as Give Me God of War, and in the early game, this is probably true. Most of the test footage I got was from Muspelheim, and the enemies I tested it on can be staggered easily because they're a lower level than me, but I had a much harder time in Niflheim where enemies were a higher level. But this is an argument against the leveling system, not the combat system, and I realize that now. I criticized the game in my first analysis because of how few combos there were, and I still stand by that. There are very few combo chains that you can get into, but there isn't a lack of depth because of this, it's just different. I do think that there's some valid criticism about how you can't cancel your attacks into a block or a dodge, especially some of the moves that activate when you attack right after a dodge, but I recently went back to God of War 3 for some footage and found that the special moves in that game can't be interrupted either, so this isn't a new problem. I'm still going to go into more detail about these individual issues, but this combat analysis is going to be a lot more positive than the first draft. I'd like to start out by speaking about many things I like in this combat system before I start criticizing its flaws. Atreus is the best AI companion I've ever had in a game. He never gets in the way, the status effects of his arrows are invaluable in most fights, and he gives you MLG callouts during combat to let you know if an enemy is throwing a projectile at you. He'll run up and stun enemies, giving you a chance to hit them or just getting them out of the way for a moment, and he even has an armor set that gives him the ability to toss you health stones if your health gets too low. He also has his own set of unique runic attacks that help stun enemies and give you a moment to breathe. He really does add a lot to the combat, and it's hard to imagine this game without him. Besides Atreus, I like how attacking enemies from behind inflicts extra stun damage on them, even if they can sometimes do a 180 when you try to do it, and this tactic proved useful during many fights. Much of the combat in this game is very satisfying, and it's amazing how much my opinion has changed since my last analysis. That being said, it still isn't perfect, and there are several ways it can be improved. First and foremost, let's address the biggest problem with the combat in this game, the camera. Ironically, I said in my first analysis that many people have an issue with the camera, but I wasn't one of them. This is true as long as you play defensively, but whenever you're going all in with the axe or the blades, then it kinda takes you out of the mood when you get sliced from behind because you weren't paying attention to the indicator. The camera should really be panned back some, and I get that the devs wanted this single shot view of Kratos back the entire game, but a dynamic camera that scales back whenever you're not locked on to enemies like For Honor has would really have gone a long way. I understand that there is a quick turn, but I almost never use it because it interrupts the flow of combat and just exposes your back to whatever it was you were initially fighting, which brings me to my next point. I mentioned a moment ago how I originally felt that the combat in this game was too segmented or segregated because so few moves can be combined into combo attacks. This isn't entirely true because you can do certain attacks one after another, but it is true in a few other regards. If you pause for a second while Kratos is attacking, he will switch stances and give you access to a few more moves that are unique to that stance. I've found that there are several times you can do this so it feels more organic, like pausing just after a parry, but ultimately it still feels weird just waiting for the stance to change before you can continue attacking. Once you do it enough times, it becomes second nature, but I think it would have been much better if you could switch stances by performing a specific combo and then proceed from there. That way you don't need to interrupt yourself and sit there menacingly until the switch happens. Some of these moves are really useful too, like the heavy axe toss or the frenzy attack with the blades. The second one can actually be activated in God of War 3 just by holding down the square button, so I feel like a better transition could have been found here. Despite that, there's a big problem that I mentioned in my first analysis that I still stand by now: weapon swaps. As it stands, there is no fast swap option. In every other God of War game before this one, switching weapons was instantaneous, but in this game, it isn't. It's not slow by any means, but it's just another thing that interrupts combat. I don't see why the devs didn't implement transitional attacks like in God of War 3 so you can just activate it at the end of a combo and keep going. The closest thing they have to this is throwing the axe and following up with the fists, but there's no quick mid-combo method of switching weapons. This was especially egregious while fighting Sigrun because she has a one-shot attack that can only be interrupted with an axe toss on Give Me God of War, and I would often die because the half-second weapon swap was sometimes all it took to give her enough time to complete the attack before the axe connected. I often just exiled the blades altogether and only fought her with the axe because it was safer. In this way, the combat is still segmented, but for a different reason. It's segmented because switching between the axe and the blades feels like such a chore that I seldom bother unless I get a break between enemy attacks. I think that the game could greatly benefit from just succumbing to video game logic and making weapon swaps instant, or implementing some attacks that switch weapons for you that can be followed up immediately. Besides transitional attacks, I think that not having a hybrid stance where Kratos wields both the axe and one of the blades was a lost opportunity. This 4th addition to the skill tree could have opened up a load of really cool possibilities, like inflicting frost and burn at the same time to create a weakened status effect. This would also open up the possibility of combining runic attacks for a special variant of them. I don't see this working for every combination of runes, but I can see it working for several of them. You really can't make your weapons interact with each other in creative ways as it is now. I tried freezing an enemy with the axe and doing a shield bash with the blades, and all it does is pull them towards you. I wasn't even given the option to implant them with a firebomb like you normally can. I think there needs to be more interactivity between the weapons to reward creative players, because as it stands, your choices between blades, axe, or fists are all viable in their own way, but trying to weave between them in combat is the game feel equivalent of pulling on the car door as a little kid waiting for your mom to unlock it for you. Probably the weirdest criticism that I found is how you can't really do anything while dodging, including block. I find that odd because I've never played an action game where you could block while dodging, but I think what gets me is that it feels like you should be able to do more during a quick step. You can't switch weapons, you can't recall the act, and for some reason it just really feels like you should be able to at least activate a block, but have it not give you the protected state until the dodge is finished. You can recall the axe before you activate a dodge or quick step, but this doesn't work for switching weapons. Having a For Honor style deflection system where you dodge into an attack while blocking would also be cool, and I know I've brought up For Honor a lot in this video, but I really do feel like Ubisoft had a very intuitive combat system on their hands at the time, and a lot of the mechanics would work great in this game. Having a mechanic where you can dodge into an attack while holding the block button to perform a deflection and follow up with an attack would be pretty damn cool. Maybe if you have the axe in hand, then Kratos cleaves them with a weaker version of the Executioner's Cleave, but if you have the blades in hand, then he stabs them in the torso and throws them at other enemies for some extra stun damage. There's a lot you can build on with these mechanics, but at the very least, I wish quickstepping allowed you to do basic things like switching weapons or call the axe. I'd also like to talk about runic attacks. I'm kinda mixed on these for various reasons. On one hand, they're this game's variant of the magic attacks and are meant to be fired off for some extra damage in a tough fight, but on the other hand, I don't like how many of them feel like they could be basic attacks. It's ironic then that the basic attack runes are some of my favorite to use in combat because they help keep up the momentum, but there are bigger problems than just this. I don't like how you have no invincibility while using these runic attacks, but only because they can't be cancelled once they're started. I get that you need to pick and choose when the right time to use a runic attack is, but you can get seriously punished if you accidentally activate one while blocking, or if you use one right as an enemy attacks and their attack lands before the rune can stun them. The solution is actually really simple. Just let the player cancel the rune once they've started it. Even for the runes that can be cancelled, it still makes you wait for the cooldown to finish, so I don't see why this can't work for all of them. Take it one step further and give the player a single second of invincibility after cancelling a rune so the last minute attack doesn't slam them for damage anyways. Other than runes, there's still several basic problems with the combat that I've encountered, and a lot of this revolves around blocking. For one, you cannot move while your shield is being hit. If there are 3 or 4 enemies barraging your shield, then you are locked in place until they quit. I had this happen with a group of Hellwalkers once and I literally couldn't move because they wouldn't stop attacking. Beyond this, there seems to be some timing issues regarding the recovery rate for when you get hit. The dual axe-wielding Draugr are a really good example for this one. Sometimes you'll get hit and will try to block or parry immediately and the game doesn't let you. This isn't so much an issue with the recovery as it is with blocking itself. Just like weapon swaps, blocking is not an instant action. There's a very slight wind-up period from when you activate a block and when it goes into effect, and this quarter-second period is all it takes to get you killed, and boy did it get me killed a lot. I don't really understand this design choice because the timing for a parry is very specific, so the player shouldn't have to factor in another quarter second when they want to activate one. I think the timing works more often than not, but these Draugr have always been able to kill me because I would activate the block immediately after getting hit the first time and get hit again. This is enough to stun lock you from full to dead on Give Me God of War difficulty. I find it infuriating when I know I did something correct but the game punishes me anyways due to poor design, and having this happen is something that always frustrated me during this playthrough. You can dodge this attack after the first hit, but my first reaction is always to go for the parry because it staggers them and lets me follow up with another attack. But despite these issues, I think this combat system is great. I'd like to see Santa Monica expand on it in the next game, and hopefully they also had some of the crazier ideas I mentioned earlier and we get to see some of them get implemented. That section was a bit lengthy, so let's get back to the main story. You're now free to return to Tyr's vault and search for the Black Rune of Jotunheim. Once you arrive, Atreus solves the sand bowl puzzle and makes his first unsettling comment since his recovery.
I wish I'd known I was a god in Elfheim. I wouldn't have felt so bad about killing so many elves.
Well, I'm not sure that's the lesson.
You've done nothing to regret. The elves forced their affairs upon us.
No, I get it now. We had god things to do, and they were in the way, dragging us into their little problems.
Again, are we just leaving that there?
Since Kratos is letting it slide, Mimir tries to lecture Atreus on the responsibilities of being a god. This starts a conversation about Tyr, where you learn that he was a god of war who worked to keep the peace and spent his time traveling to other lands and sharing his knowledge to prevent any conflicts from starting. He also tells you that it's likely Tyr is the person who helped the giants escape Midgard and hide the Jotunheim Tower. As you search for the Black Rune, you'll find yourself in Tyr's treasure room. Kratos finds some gifts from Greece, including some pottery depicting him with the Blades of Chaos standing on a pile of dead bodies. He smashes the pot before Atreus has a chance to see it, and then lies about it when asked later.
What did you see in that vault that set you off?
It is not important.
Seemed important to you.
It was a rash impulse. You need not dwell on my failings.
Wow, that was almost an apology. Well, I guess you do like to smash pottery.
Kratos accidentally triggers a trap that requires you to solve a puzzle as water fills the room and the roots holding him in place rub Freya's protection mark off his neck.
Please hurry! I don't know yet if I can drown!
Mimir finds out he can't drown, and the platform starts moving towards some spikes in the ceiling after you solve the puzzle. Atreus manages to stop the trap, but it destroys his mother's knife in the process. Once you head back down, Kratos gives him a new knife of a mixture of metals from Sparta and Midgard. This isn't just a gift from Kratos, it's his way of saying that Atreus has proven himself and has completed his rite of passage.
So I'm a man now. Like you?
No. We are not men. We are more than that. The responsibility is far greater. And you must be better than me. Understand?
With the knife, he's able to destroy the magical mask protecting the rune. It appears blank to Kratos, but the rune is revealed whenever Atreus touches it for some reason, and then dissolves. But wait guys, what's this? A fight with 2 trolls? Well, there's an innovative and interesting encounter that we haven't seen yet. Once they're dead, you head back to the sand bowl and take the elevator to the top. Kratos uses the slow-moving elevator as a chance to bond with Atreus over some Greek wine he picked up in the vault. Atreus asks Kratos why he left Greece and mentions how he always told him that there are no good gods, but he and Tyr are proof that there are.
You only killed those deserving, right?
Yes.
Ah, but who's worthy enough to judge?
Quiet, head. We are. We know better.
Uh-huh. Sounding more like your da by the moment.
Once the child is done telling the smartest man in the world that he is worthy enough to judge who deserves death, you proceed to the mountain. Atreus asks Kratos if he can tell Sindri that he's a god, and Kratos tells him no. He begins to debate about how keeping secrets makes you no better than Odin, and that you should always be open and honest about everything, despite Kratos' attempts to educate him on discretion. Then, in possibly the biggest leap in character development you've ever seen in the game, Atreus chews out Sindri for how he's constantly talking about Brock.
Do something about it or shut up already.
I see.
Yeah! We're sick of hearing about little people's little problems!
Alright.
If I were any other YouTuber, I would say something like, welcome to the worst part of the game, but because I'm not, I will say, welcome to the worst part of Atreus' character arc. Is that the same thing? Maybe. Let's take a moment to talk about this, because it's really not as bad as people have made it out to be. This 180 in Atreus' character isn't as sudden or abrupt as it may appear. The problem is that on your first playthrough, you don't know that. You've spent so much time with Atreus the Idealist that whenever you come to Atreus the Pragmatic, it feels very out of place. Here's what I mean. By this point in the game, I have been playing for a little over 20 hours. 19 of those have been with normal, good-natured Atreus. He has learned, matured, and grown over the course of the game, but he has always maintained the same attitude. Help those in need because it's what his mother would have wanted. All his decisions have been tethered around his idealism to the point of rebuke from his father, and he has always tried to see the good in people. For only 1 hour, Atreus starts to pivot from these ideals out of his newfound sense of superiority whenever he learns he's a god. For the entire game, Atreus has had his personal ideals clashing with Kratos' single-minded devotion to their goal. Kratos has been telling him for seemingly his entire life that all the gods are evil and should not be trusted, even to the point of burning a bridge with Freya, somebody Atreus had respect for, simply because she's a god. He has been teaching Atreus to never offer help without something in return, to mind his own business, and to ignore those in need.
But maybe they need help.
They do not stop us, so they do not concern us. We are here for the light. I do not care who they are, nor what they want.
It feels wrong to ignore them.
We will get over these feelings.
Ivari isn't happy about us taking his stuff.
I do not care. Boy, what did I tell you about offering help?
Don't.
Correct.
But can't we
This is not a debate.
What Atreus doesn't understand is that Kratos doesn't do this out of a sense of superiority, it's out of a sense of loyalty. Kratos has only ever been loyal to his family. He abandoned the god's task to save Helios so that he could see his daughter. He risked his life fighting the god of death just to save his brother. Once his family died, he turned his loyalty to himself, to the point of putting on his former chains of bondage and declaring himself his own master. In this game, Kratos is only loyal to Atreus, and he doesn't want to needlessly put his life in danger. The problem is, Atreus is misinterpreting his father's intentions. He's taking everything Kratos said about the gods and challenging it based off of what he has learned about Tyr and his ignorance of Kratos' past. The reason this gets messy is that you would expect him to apply his own ideals and honor Faye's memory by trying to be more like Tyr. Instead, he begins to think himself superior, and it comes off as more of a power trip than a conscious decision.
No, I get it now. We had God things to do, and they were in the way, dragging us into their little problem.
He has heard his entire life of these ruthless, powerful gods who are above the law of mortals, and now he sees himself as their equal. Any limitations he believed he once had are now irrelevant because he is a god, but more than that, he has completed his rite of passage and now sees himself as an adult too. There's just one problem with all this. It's a complete regression of his growth and maturity up until this point. Atreus has shown at every opportunity that he is not stupid. Naive, yes, but stupid? He has been extremely humble and level-headed for the entire game, and learning he is a god shouldn't change that. He even says, "I don't feel like a god." He's smart enough to know that nothing has changed and that he is now in a position to be a benevolent god that helps people and makes the world a better place. The only true explanation for how sudden this feels, other than how rushed the game was, is that it is a power trip. He was already confident in his abilities before he learned he is a god, and now that he has parity with them, he truly does feel superior to those around him. It doesn't help that Kratos reinforced this back in Tyr's vault. Just like in The Last of Us 2, there are reasons for what's going on, they're just not very good ones. There is a very specific narrative moment that requires Atreus to behave this way in order for it to work, and I think it was taken a little bit too far at some points. Like when he, I don't know, disrespects his mother. You know, the same mother that he got so pissed off when someone else insulted her that he, like, went into a coma. Like, that's how mad it made him. Yeah, he just disrespects her. He doesn't care anymore.
It was needless and unkind.
Truth is more important than kindness.
Your mother would disagree.
She wasn't a god. Why don't you let me carry her up from here?
No.
Why not? We're almost there. You know I can handle it.
Can you? After the way you spoke of her, I question that.
What? That she wasn't a god?
She was better than a god. And you shall not dishonor her.
Fine. Carry her yourself.
An interesting thing that happens is Sindri's dialogue will change after Atreus chews him out.
Oh, I'm glad I'm still useful to you.
I'm not entirely sure if the weather changed in response to Atreus' attitude, or if this is some Great Gatsby-style imagery to show that his judgment is clouded and he isn't himself. There was some pretty whack-ass cloud swirling when he got sick, so it's possible that he does have influence on the environment around him. Maybe it's a result of how he's more in touch with nature, but nothing out of the ordinary happened during Faye's funeral, so maybe I'm reading too far into it. I'm probably reading too far into a lot of things. It only gets worse from here. He openly disrespects Kratos and Faye, he starts talking about how the Aesir are beneath him, and then you meet Modi in the mountain. Thor apparently blamed him for Magni's death and beat him within an inch of his life. Kratos tells Atreus that he's already too injured to fight and they don't need to kill him. He does anyways, because of course he does. He just Usain Bolted through 15 hours of character development. Why wouldn't he?
Nobody cared about him anyways. What's the difference?
There are consequences to killing a god.
Why? How do you know? How do you know?
There's a trigger point after Atreus attacks this Draugr where he stops responding to your inputs. If you don't know what's going on, you probably think that this is a bug because it isn't communicated. You'll be wondering why he's randomly firing off runic attacks and not responding to your inputs until you realize that the AI has been given a mind of its own and no longer cares what you have to say, just like how Atreus is with Kratos. Atreus begins to question Kratos about his past and where he got the blades from, and once again responds with disdain whenever he says they're not going to talk about it. There's an interesting bit of dialogue whenever you get closer to the peak of the mountain.
Brother's been warned. The tunnels I'm seeing in the walls up here show signs of recent dragon activity.
We already killed that dragon.
Oh, did you then? Well, how'd that go?
I like how the dragon is brought back up even though it's something you likely killed 10 to 12 hours ago by this point. Tying small details together in a game shows a level of care that a lot of video game writers aren't given the opportunity to do, and it's likely to make you at least 2% less angry while playing. Finally, you make it back to the summit. There's some special dialogue if you bring Mimir to his body that I forgot to record on my first time through.
Well, that's a sight no man should ever see. Thanks for that.
Atreus slices his hand open and draws the rune in blood on the stone. I would criticize Kratos for not saying anything after how he treated Atreus' burn in the beginning of the game, but I remember being so tired of his shit the first time I played that I didn't care, so I imagine Kratos is at that point too. Baldur appears after the portal opens and starts giving Kratos the smackdown. He's impaled through the hip with a giant rock, which, spoiler alert, is never brought up for the rest of the game and is completely forgotten about. Kratos runs, jumps, and climbs around with a massive chunk of stone lodged in his hip, and it's never even acknowledged. Kratos picks up Baldur like an old school cartoon character and rams him through the stone portal, which destroys it. You can make the case that he's being careless here, but he hasn't always been known to be entirely clear-headed when enraged, and he did just get a hole through the hip. Atreus is more upset that the portal was destroyed than he is that his father was just impaled, and we now get to see the point of this whole section. Kratos tries to stop Atreus from charging Baldur, and this is the result.
We're not ready for this.
I am ready.
And here I thought my family was fucked up.
Remember what I said about Atreus not being stupid? Well, if you were to judge from this scene alone, you wouldn't know that, would you? In what world does Atreus think that incapacitating his father is the best course of action? I could understand if Kratos had hit Atreus and he did it in retaliation, but all he did was shove him back. Do you see the insane degree that they take this to? I'm going to be perhaps a little too fair with the game and say this. Having a moment where Atreus turns against Kratos in an ego-induced rage would have been a great reflection of the previous games. It would be a moment where Kratos' worst fears are coming to pass. His son is attacking him. His son is him. It would have been a powerful moment if it was given about 5 or 6 hours of setup instead of less than 2. The writing here is actually very good, it's just lacking a slow-broiled transition and it's too noticeable. For a moment like this to work, it cannot be an abrupt change in character that comes without warning. It needs to be something you don't really notice until it's too late. Here's the part where I cut the game some slack. There is no possible way that Santa Monica Studios could justify another 5 or 6 hours of runtime. You could make a case that the game is already too long, and adding that much time to the story would fatigue the player to the point where they just may stop playing. If there were more unique areas and realms to explore, then you might be able to justify it, but now you've just doubled the amount of effort needed to make this work. Not to mention that having to take yet another detour to another realm would start to feel artificial. You already went to Alfheim to get the light, why do you need to go backtrack again to go to Svartalfheim for a legendary artifact to bypass another barrier? It would start to make the obstacles feel arbitrary. It would be obvious that they are just trying to pad the game and stall for time while the real plot is still being set up. So the solution is to just not have this whole section, right? Well, I don't really feel like that would be a good choice either. As out of place as this entire portion of the game feels, it is necessary in order for certain events we're about to see to unfold so that the story can continue. I'd even argue that some parts later on would be worse off without this part. This 1 hour of bad is likely keeping the rest of the story from being much worse, and the story does get better after this point, it just doesn't reach the standards set by the first half. I wouldn't call it God of War's Lost Izalith, but it's certainly comparable. Santa Monica did the best with their time and budget, and it's important to mention that. Atreus attacks Baldur, which results in him getting a knife in the arm. This knocks him unconscious because I actually don't know why this knocks him unconscious. The kid has taken much greater punishment and not been knocked out, but I guess a knife to the arm was enough. Maybe it just hurt his pride enough to put him to sleep, I don't know. Kratos doesn't hesitate to jump headfirst off the mountain after them. He lucks out that he caught the dragon just as it was leaving, and you have another QTE fight section. You're probably wondering exactly how Baldur managed to get himself and his dragon here. Well, here's what I think. After Freya's protection stave was rubbed off in Tyr's vault, you run into Modi in the mountain, so it's not too much of a stretch to say that Baldur would also be able to guess your destination. It had never occurred to me until now that Mimir's warning about seeing signs of dragon activity may not just be a callback to earlier, it might also be a bit of foreshadowing. I think Baldur flew ahead of you, found a path up the mountain from one of the dragon tunnels, and then sent the dragon to where it was when he took Atreus. You can see the dragon is just starting to take off whenever you jump down, but you do have to look pretty closely. Or I'm making excuses for another plot hole. It's possible. I'm not perfect. You fight on top of the dragon until you knock Baldur off. He channels his inner video game logic and climbs back up from the other side, which knocks Kratos down. He uses his blades to catch himself on the dragon's wing, which it doesn't seem to mind until he slices the very tip of it. Kratos gets lucky again and lands right on Tyr's bridge, and you see the dragon crash nearby. Kratos runs into the warp room and the game once again breaks its own rules by making the roots appear prematurely. It's been said before by other people, but they really should have just made Kratos jump right here instead of making the roots appear. The temple also takes twice as long as usual to align the bridge, which gives Atreus enough time to wake up and try to take more stabs at Baldur. Despite the fact that Baldur literally just told Kratos it's too late, it's locked in, reinserting the Bifrost manages to end the sequence prematurely and send them flying into Helheim. I don't even know if this is possible, but what I do want to know is why didn't they just slam into the outer half of the temple whenever they flew out the door? It's possible that Kratos opened the doors so forcefully that they stayed open throughout the entire cutscene, which is the only answer I can think of that makes sense, but still, doors shut behind you constantly in this game, so it seems a bit contrived that this many inconsistencies happen all at once. Landing in front of Tyr's temple, the door staying open whenever he runs through, the vines creating a bridge in the middle of the sequence, and being able to interrupt the sequence at all once it started. And to top it all off, now they're in the literal worst part of any realm they could have ended up in, past the Bridge of the Damned in Helheim. With everything that's just happened, Kratos must be frantic, right?
Boy?
Oh, I guess not.
You will listen to me and not speak a word. I am your father, and you, boy, are not yourself. You are too quick to temper. You are rash, insubordinate, and out of control. This will not stand. You will honor your mother and abandon this path you have chosen. It is not too late. This discussion is far from over. We are here because of you, boy. Never forget that.
Once he's done telling Atreus how much of a disappointment he is, you move on. You start to hear Atreus' voice, but he says it's not him talking. You then come to a vision that Atreus has of when he killed Modi. He's pretty shocked about what he's seeing, and makes the comment, "That wasn't me, I couldn't have done that." Now, I've heard some people interpret this as him having no memory of killing Modi, or not truly being himself whenever he did. It does sort of come off that way, but in the next scene Atreus says this.
I'm not gonna let it bother me. Like you said, Mimir, it was just an illusion. That wasn't me.
What I think he means when he says that wasn't me isn't that he doesn't remember doing it, it's the surprise of seeing himself do it. Here's an example. Think of one of your most embarrassing moments from your childhood, or if you can't think of one, then one of your biggest mistakes or regrets. For me, this would be the time in 9th grade when a friend of mine tried to start shit and I bitch slapped him in front of a group of people. Having someone look at you and say, "I'm not really surprised that you hit me, but why didn't you punch me?" doesn't do much for your reputation with the boys. Now imagine that this moment is being played on a TV right in front of you. Depending on how much you thought that moment through before acting will determine your response, but if your decision was too rash, then your response might be like Atreus. I couldn't have done that, it couldn't have been that bad. Atreus isn't just witnessing an embarrassing moment from his childhood that makes him feel a little insecure, he is watching himself murder somebody in cold blood. In the heat of the moment, he didn't care because he wasn't thinking. He was acting on impulse and doing whatever he wanted at the time. Going from the summit in Midgard to literally hell has been a wake-up call for him, and now he is seeing just how far he was willing to go when he was feeling on top of the world. He also appears to be having a bit of an identity crisis. I would go as far as to say that he always found his identity in his relationship with his mother, and now that she's gone, he felt completely alone. Once he started to bond with Kratos and then learned that he's a god, he discovered a part of himself that he never knew about and let it get to his head, especially whenever he disrespects his own mother. The timing of Atreus' changing character may be jarring, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that the writing itself was bad. You run into Baldur further ahead, where he's also being tormented by visions of his past. In his case, he's tormented by the fact that he didn't kill his mother when he had the chance. His mother, who turns out to be Freya, put a spell on him that prevented him from feeling pain and would make him immortal. He tried to kill her whenever she did it, but he ultimately let her live. Kratos questions Mimir about why he didn't tell them, and Mimir claims that he didn't know himself. Then this happens.
Such chaos. I will have much to do after I kill you.
Who is that?
We must hurry.
If you've played God of War 3, then you know what this is about. If you haven't, and if you had no knowledge of the franchise before this game, then you're probably intrigued about what it is that has Kratos so anxious. Kratos lights a pile of dead bodies in Hellbramble on fire to make some warmth, and you take a boat towards Tyr's temple. Before everybody starts screaming and claims that you can't make a fire in hell, the only reason this is possible is because of the Blades of Chaos. Mimir says that the ship can only get you halfway there because there's a waterfall that separates you and the temple. It doesn't take long for you to get stuck on an iceberg, so Kratos destroys part of the ship so he can pull back the sails and make an airship. You get stuck shortly after, and Kratos tells Atreus to stay with the boat while he goes to free it. This gives Mimir a chance to talk to Kratos in private, where he says this.
We need to talk, brother. You do realize it's over, don't you? Even if we make it back to Midgard, you and Baldur destroyed the only gate to Jotunheim. We are out of options. And that boy up there, he's in 9 kinds of pain. His head's turned so far around
Atreus is not your concern.
Well, he might become everyone's concern if you don't do something. You don't have to be the smartest man in the world to see that.
This more or less confirms what I said about Atreus having a bit of an identity crisis in the wake of his mother's death. Kratos lets Atreus help free the boat in response to this, and you make your way back to Tyr's temple. You then hear the same voices as before. You will fight wave after wave of enemies as you make your way back to the temple, and many harpoons will break up the ship in the process. Eventually, you'll get to see where those voices are coming from.
It is time, my son. Look around at what you have done.
Come on, we gotta go!
You saw.
There's no time, look! I have a plan! Jump!
I really like this scene, but I have one big problem with it. It would have been much better if they used the original audio from God of War 3 back when T.C. Carson was still voice acting Kratos. Christopher Judge does a great job as older Kratos, but I think having the original audio would have been great for multiple reasons. A cameo from the original voice actor is just one of them. Other reasons include only older fans being able to recognize the voice, and that the change in voice actor never felt jarring to me. Christopher Judge sounds like an older and more mature version of Kratos, but T.C. Carson captures the younger version of him too. Despite them being two completely different people, they still manage to sound like Kratos at the stage of his life that he's in when they voice him.
Look around you, Athena. The world stands in ruin. What good is your message?
Until our journey is over, one of us must remain focused. Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief.
They probably decided not to do it due to audio quality issues, but I still think it would have been cool to have a cameo from T.C. Carson. You jump off the ship because Kratos is immune to fall damage and land in one of Odin's secret chambers within Tyr's temple, where you find the missing panel from one of the Jotnar shrines depicting Tyr walking on thin air. Whenever Mimir takes a closer look, it reveals secret plans that show Tyr had another way of traveling between realms. The plans would only be revealed by the few people that the giants entrusted their gifted sight, so Odin could never see it. In the next room, Kratos asks Atreus what he saw, and he claims that he didn't see anything. If you're paying attention, then it's obvious that he's lying, but Kratos takes him at his word and is relieved to hear that his past wasn't revealed to him. You need a key to open the secret chamber in Tyr's temple, so you head back to Midgard to ask Brock for help. Kratos once again asks Mimir why he didn't tell them that Baldur was Freya's son, and the conversation goes like this.
Why did you not tell us Baldur is the son of Freya?
He is! It's shocking every time I hear it, and yet obviously I know it. When I think about Baldur and Freya...
Mimir?
Yes, lad?
Freya.
How's that, brother?
Ed, tell me Baldur's vulnerability.
Baldur is blessed with invulnerability to all threats, physical or magical.
Wait, what is happening?
He is bewitched not to speak of what he knows.
You go see Brock and ask him for help, but he refuses to forge anything that isn't a weapon of mass destruction. Sindri shows up and offers to help Brock forge it, and they quickly reconcile their differences and start working together. I like how this part is slowly set up throughout the game, with Brock indirectly revealing that he misses Sindri and lamenting their falling out when speaking to Kratos about Atreus.
Times he gets so wrapped up in his work, Sindri hasn't the sense to sip or sup. And if he does remember, good luck getting him to cook his own meat. Guess I got all the stomach in the family. Along with the smarts.
You miss him.
What, that spit-fister? What do you know?
And my responsibility to make it right.
Well, we all gotta take responsibility sometime. Huh?
It's the little things like this that help me appreciate the game, but I just can't get over that motherfucking flag. You enter the lower level of Tyr's temple and find yourself in a room that mirrors the warp room, except everything is upside down. Some doors open, and when you proceed through, you find the entire temple is on an axle that can be flipped. You go about breaking the chains that hold the temple in place, and you find two messages along the way. One of them says, "Until gods grow good," and the other says, "Leave them in peace." You can actually read these in either order, it works both ways. Once you've broken both chains, you head back to the axle so you can flip the temple. I wouldn't call this Kratos' greatest feat. I think that goes to stopping Kronos from squishing him like a mosquito in God of War 3, but it does show the writers are willing to make Kratos as strong as they need to when the situation calls for it. Atreus comes full circle with how he was before their Helheim trip and says that everybody is stronger when they work together. His words help solidify the main themes that have been resonating throughout every area of this game: family and unity. You've likely noticed that every story in this game is about one of these two things. Kratos and Atreus are fulfilling Faye's dying wish and getting closer as they do. Magni and Modi have a bloody sibling rivalry that goes back to Magni receiving credit from something Modi helped do when they were children, and you hear constant stories about the Aesir and how dysfunctional they are. Freya only wanted to protect Baldur, but her efforts caused him to resent her and pushed him towards his father Odin, who deceived him into trying to find Jotunheim. Brock and Sindri don't actually believe that they are better than each other. It's just something they told themselves to hide the fact that their regret for forging Mjolnir eventually pushed them apart. Sindri didn't want to create any more weapons afterward, and Brock wasn't willing to give up on their family name over one mistake, so they eventually went their separate ways. Even the side content has these themes. A Reaver's son stabs his father in the back over a whetstone and is eventually killed by the rest of his crew. A man and his mother made a statue of Thor after his father's death, and Thor takes advantage of their hospitality and eventually kills the man's mother in a drunken rage. A restless ship captain who is responsible for the death of his entire crew wants you to kill them because they've turned into Hellwalkers. Everything comes back to these core themes in one way or another. You then move inside to find that the room is right side up this time, and find what Tyr used to travel between realms, the Unity Stone, which only solidifies what I just got done saying, doesn't it? The panel you saw back in Helheim was showing Tyr holding the Unity Stone as he stepped off the World Tree in the realm between realms, so that's what you need to do. You step off the path and land on another one further down where you find the Jotunheim Tower. Just a quick attention to detail, you can actually see the tower in the realm between realms if you're perceptive enough. It just kind of shimmers off in the distance. Tyr hid it in the realm between realms so that it could never be found except by those who were able to get to the Unity Stone. You use the stone inside the tower and you begin to move through all the realms you have access to, including the two realms I've only talked about in passing, Niflheim and Muspelheim. Mimir explains that the magic in the Unity Stone was created from the original primordial essence that all the realms are made of, so it's essentially the matter of the universe. Whenever you try to use the travel room to Jotunheim, Mimir says it won't work because there's no travel stone. The giants would gift those they trusted with a special sight where their eyes were imbued with Bifrost crystal, which is the same thing Mimir has. Tyr used his own eyes to travel to Jotunheim instead of the crystal so that nobody the giants distrusted would be able to access the realm. Odin plucked out Mimir's other eye whenever he imprisoned him in order to keep him from traveling between realms, which is weird because he was imprisoned in a tree, but whatever. Mimir says to ask Sindri and Brock if they know where Odin might have hidden it, so you go to ask them. But before we do, okay guys, just bear with me here for a second, but you tried to travel to a realm where there is no stone to take you there. So what happens? Well, the temple doesn't take you there. Nothing happens when you use it. So if Asgard was locked in earlier when Baldur was using Tyr's temple, how did you get to Helheim? Like, how? If Tyr's temple needs to focus the light through the crystal to get to that realm, and the Helheim crystal wasn't lifted up to where it could use it, how did you get there? I really should drop it by this point, but I can't. Like, I just can't. The game just established that that shouldn't have been possible, so why did it happen? Unless Kratos can now just, like, click his heels 3 times and return to hell, like, there are very few legitimate plot holes in this game, but that is one of them. Now that I'm done demonstrating my quadruple-digit IQ and my basketball-sized brain, let's just go ahead and get back to the story. So you ask Brock and Sindri if they know where Odin may have hidden Mimir's eye. They both tell you that Odin asked if they were willing to make a giant statue with a secret compartment hidden in it, and they both declined. This statue was the one of Thor that the serpent ate in the beginning of the game, so you need to go speak to him about it. The serpent says that he's willing to let you row into his stomach and look for the statue, so that's what you do.
I've never been in a giant's belly either. How about you, Father?
Never one who was not trying to eat me.
You really should expect that sort of response at this point.
You find the statue inside, and it's still intact enough to retrieve Mimir's eye. Once you do, you start to head back out. Something happens to the serpent and it spits you out near Thalmor's corpse. Freya arrives at the same time and tells you she's looking for Baldur and that her talk with Kratos helped her see things differently. Baldur arrives right on cue. He was able to get out of Helheim by... Actually, I don't know how he got out of Helheim. I spent most of my time during this playthrough trying to find an answer to how Baldur and the rest of the Aesir were traveling around without using Tyr's temple. Whenever he first arrives at your house in the beginning, it's still underwater, and you never actually see anyone use the travel room. I determined after some consideration that they were using the travel bridge where Mimir was imprisoned to get to and from Asgard, since they basically despawn 30 seconds after he tells them to piss off. The only way they could have gone was through the portal. After Kratos breaks the gateway, Baldur uses the travel room to try and take Atreus to Asgard because there was no other way he could have gotten there. Baldur has access to a Bifrost, which is the only way he could have activated the bridge in the first place, and I guess his invulnerability to all threats, both physical and magical, caused him to survive the cold in Helheim. The only time he could have activated the bridge to get out of Helheim would have been when you were dicking around in the Realm Between Realms getting the Jotunheim Tower, but I still think Brock and Sindri would have said something if they saw him leave. The truth is, there's no real answer to this question, he's just here. Freya tries to reconcile with her son, but he's only intent on trying to kill her. You fight Baldur for a while before Freya steps in and uses some vines to trap Kratos. Baldur manages to dodge them when he sees it coming, which leaves Kratos vulnerable. Let me run this by you again. Freya, whomst Mimir said cannot attack anything, even in self-defense, uses vines to trap Kratos. It doesn't matter if this is non-lethal, this should qualify as an attack, and she shouldn't even be able to do this. Why are you like this, God of War? Anyways, Baldur punches Atreus, and the mistletoe arrowhead from his quiver strap ends up breaking Baldur's spell. Freya temporarily turns into Darth Vader. Instead of Baldur thanking Kratos and Atreus for breaking the spell, which, by the way, Mimir says was the only reason that he even wanted to go to Jotunheim, he decides to keep trying to kill Kratos and Atreus while Freya takes control of Thalmor's corpse. Mimir informs them that Baldur's spell is officially broken, which is why Freya freaked out when she saw the mistletoe arrows earlier in the game. Had Atreus still had them at the summit, then they probably would have killed Baldur right there. Freya begs Kratos and Baldur to stop fighting, but neither of them listen. This fight goes pretty much the exact same as the first Baldur fight, except with a few more gimmicks. Compared to how hard Sigrun whooped my ass for 3 hours straight before now, this fight is a complete joke. You do your little power struggle until finally you give Baldur a father-son ass-kicking combo. Freya once again tries to stop you by using the giant's breath to freeze them, and Atreus calls the serpent in its native language so it can help out. This knocks everybody back to where the fight started, where Atreus tells Kratos what he was told right before he killed Modi. Freya once again tries to reconcile with Baldur, but he says that he will never forgive her for what she did to him. She decides to let him kill her rather than fight back, and Kratos once again steps in.
Why do you even care? You could have walked away.
The Sigurlians here must be better than this.
Despite the fact that he just saved her life, Freya lashes out at Kratos for killing Baldur and swears her revenge on him. She also challenges Kratos to tell Atreus about his past, which he does.
Boy, listen close. I'm from a land called Sparta. I made a deal with a god that cost me my soul. I killed many who were deserving. And many who were not. killed my father.
That was your father in hell. Is this what it is to be a god? Is this how it always ends? Sons killing their mothers? Their fathers?
No. We will be the gods we choose to be. Not those who have been.
Now that Mimir's eye is safely stored back in his skull, and Baldur went to that big meat hole in the sky, you head back to the travel room to head to Jotunheim. Mimir offers to stay behind while Kratos and Atreus finish their journey, and you leave him with Brok and Sindri. Once you reach the mountain, Kratos removes his bandages, revealing his scars to Atreus. Now that he knows what Kratos did in his past, he has no reason to hide anything else from him. I'm just waiting for the day where he says, "Oh yeah, I murdered my first family." Is that important? Kratos gives Faye's ashes to Atreus, showing that he now trusts him enough to carry them. Jotunheim is completely empty when you arrive, and you find various lore markers speaking of how Thor and Odin drove them to near extinction. Atreus touches the wall as he passes through a door which reveals an extensive mural detailing all of the game's events up until this point. What's more is it shows that Faye was actually a giant. Kratos didn't know this, so it's just as much of a shock to him. Probably the most important detail here is that Baldur wasn't actually looking for Kratos in the beginning of the game. It's likely he didn't even know who he was dealing with whenever he arrived. He mistook him for a giant because Faye was a giant. Recall this conversation from the beginning of the game and look at how much the meaning changes with the context.
No use hiding anymore. I know who you are.
What's going on? Do you know him?
More importantly, I know what you are.
Boy, beneath the floor. Now!
But you told me never to go down there. Who is that?
I do not know.
What's he talking about?
I do not know. Get in.
Just tell me what I want to know. No need for this to get bloody. I thought you'd be bigger. But you're definitely the one. Long way from home, aren't you?
What do you want?
Oh, you already know the answer to that.
Whatever it is you seek, I do not have it. You should move on.
And here I thought your kind was supposed to be so enlightened, so much better than us, so much smarter. And yet you hide out here in the woods, like a coward.
When you don't know that Baldur is looking for a giant, then it sounds like he's talking about the fancy Greek gods who find themselves superior to all others. But when you do have this information, it's obvious he's referring to the giants and their bias against the Aesir. It also changes the meaning of several points during the fight. When you don't know who Baldur is, this line doesn't make any sense.
I'm not my brother, and if you'd given me what I wanted, it wouldn't have ended this way.
But when you do, it's clear that he's still mistaking Kratos for a giant and that he's telling him that he wouldn't have just killed him for the hell of it like Thor would. The final thing it changes is how Baldur thought that Kratos would be the person to finally make him feel something. At first, his reasoning seems to be because Kratos is a foreign god of war and therefore should be able to make him feel pain, but you later learn that Odin convinced Baldur that getting to Jotunheim is the best way to break the spell, so he convinced himself that giants could make him feel pain. Since he's mistaking Kratos for a giant, he thought that fighting him would make him feel something, which is why he was pushing so hard for Kratos to hit him. This scene will mean multiple different things depending on how much information you have, which is why it's a very good foundation for the story. It's a shame then that the second half of the game was so rushed and is riddled with plot holes. Once Atreus walks away, Kratos sees another part of the prophecy that depicts Atreus holding somebody as they die. When I first saw this, I thought this was Kratos, but I'm not so sure now. Just compare Kratos' drawing on the mural to whoever this is. Unless he dons a kilt, trims his beard, and loses an arm and a leg in the next game, then it might not be him. I think this is more likely to be a different character, maybe even Tyr. It's never explicitly said that Tyr is dead, everybody just assumes Odin killed him. But Tyr is a god of war, and he has proven to be incredibly clever. He hid the damn Jotunheim tower and hid the plans for the Unity Stone right under Odin's nose. Do you really believe that Odin would be his undoing? It's more than likely that he's in hiding and biding his time until Ragnarok. There's just one more thing I need to discuss, and it's that tweet from Matt Sophos. About halfway through the editing process for this video, I came across some information that directly contradicts this tweet. There's a video on Game Informer's YouTube channel called 102 Rapid Fire Questions with Cory Barlog, and not even 30 seconds into the video, they say this.
Is Kratos still a god?
Yes.
Immortal?
Yes.
Considering that Cory Barlog is the director of this game, and that I can't even find this tweet from Matt Sophos anymore, I think it's safe to say that this is the canon explanation for Kratos' godhood. He's still immortal, and he's still fully god. Which means my Blade of Olympus theory is once again probable, and I will stand by it until I find evidence against it. I'm glad that Kratos isn't a demigod, because otherwise you would have to sit through another 10-page rant about why I dislike that explanation. So, let me summarize my points. Kratos is sent to open Pandora's box and receive what the Oracle of Athens calls the power to kill a god. Without this, he cannot kill Ares. It is this power that he uses to kill every god, including Zeus, until it is released from him at the end of God of War 3. My issue was that if Kratos doesn't regain his godhood and he no longer possesses the power of hope, then he shouldn't be capable of killing any more gods. The obvious argument is that he's a demigod, so that's why he can kill Magni and Baldur. But the biggest problem with that explanation is that if Kratos never needed the power of hope to kill a god since he's a demigod, then Zeus had no reason to send him to open Pandora's box, release the evils within, and ultimately corrupt Olympus with them in the process. Saying that Kratos doesn't regain his godhood creates the context that the events of the first game weren't necessary, which causes the second and third games to crumble as well. If Kratos didn't need to open Pandora's box, Zeus wouldn't get corrupted by fear and try to kill him, which means Kratos would never save the Titans and lead them against Olympus, which means Greece would never have been destroyed, which means Kratos wouldn't be in Midgard. Thanks to Cory Barlog, this massive retcon disguised as a soft retcon doesn't need to happen. Isn't talking about God of War fun? In the next area, you find a handprint that looks just like the one that Faye used to mark the trees. It shows that all the golden paint that is on the things you climb on was drawn by her, which is a really cool concept if that didn't require her to paint things underwater. Unless this prophecy was discovered before the World Serpent's arrival, which is hinted to have caused the flood well over 100 years ago, then I don't see how this could be a feasible explanation. It's a nice touch, but it doesn't make any sense. Once you reach the highest peak, you find that all the giants are dead. That is, at least the ones you can see from this high up. Kratos calls Atreus son for the first time, and they spread Faye's ashes together. It's a really touching moment besides Kratos' armor clipping through the bag. Once they're done spreading her ashes, Atreus says this.
The giants called me... Loki?
Loki. That's the name your mother wanted for you when you were born.
This was a pretty interesting revelation the first time I heard it, and it makes me wonder how they're going to tie it into the next game's story. Kratos tells Atreus the story of his namesake, which he remarks is the first time he's told him a good story. Once you head back, you find Mimir on the floor. He warns you that your time in Jotunheim was longer than it may have appeared, and that Fimbulwinter has started, the winter that will last 3 years in the precursor of Ragnarok. The issue is that it's at least 100 years earlier than it's supposed to be, so Kratos' presence has changed things. Once you make it back to Midgard, your goal is to head back home. When you do, Atreus has a vision of the future, which looks like this.
What was that?
Your ball!
I don't think I need to explain what this is hinting at. At this point, you're finished with the story and you're free to go explore, finish up some side quests, or play in some of the other realms. If you haven't already, you can also go hunt down all the Valkyries for some tough endgame bosses. Once you defeated the Valkyrie Queen, Mimir will tell you that Freya approached him during your time in Jotunheim and interrogated him about where she can find her warrior spirit. She's hellbent on killing Kratos for what he did to Baldur and will likely be a boss in the next game. And that's the last of the important story stuff to get through, so give yourself a round of applause for getting through it with me. You may recall almost 2.5 hours ago that I said God of War is one of my favorite games of all time, and it still is. Yes, the story becomes a complete mess a little over the halfway point, some things don't make any sense or outright break established rules in order to happen, and I would be hard-pressed to call this game a masterpiece. The combat can be incredibly frustrating if enemies are a higher level than you, and a complete joke if they're below you, but I found myself enjoying it much more once I actually began experimenting. I'm glad I rewrote my combat analysis, because a lot of the criticism was still valid, but I would have looked back on it in disdain. Some of you aren't going to like that I went so hard on this game, and I fully expect to see some backlash in the comments, because this game has more than its fair share of fans who think it is truly flawless. Just know that despite how much I grode it for its stupid moments, I do still love this game, and I'm already considering doing a New Game Plus run as we speak. I only go so hard on it because I want to see the franchise succeed, but at the end of the day, this game just isn't perfect. There are only 3 unique bosses in this game, 2 fights against Baldur, and the rest of the boss count are reskinned trolls with various other gimmicks. I've already said why the boss count is so low, but I can't help but wish that there were at least 2 more bosses to cap off these areas you travel around. I know that Santa Monica is breaking in a new engine, but I'd really like to see them expand on this combat system like they did between the second and third game. Whenever the time comes for Kratos to do a gear reset in the next game, I really hope that they don't go for the Thor breaks the Leviathan axe and kills Kratos trope that they have done in every single other mainline title. I hope they keep this entire skill tree or completely rework the game with a new one. There are a lot of really cool concepts you can explore with this combat system, and I will be very disappointed if there is only a baby step between this game and the next. And, of course, I wish the story wasn't such a hot mess after the halfway point. I understand that the question of how do we get Kratos and Atreus into Helheim isn't easy to answer, but the whole travel room sequence is riddled with plot holes and inconsistencies that make the whole thing feel contrived. I fully expect the story in the next game to be much better than this one, and at least this game's story laid a solid foundation. Above all else though, I really just want to see the new heights that the devs take the next game to. I try not to get hyped since I pre-ordered both No Man's Sky and Mass Effect Andromeda, but I find it difficult not to be excited about the future. At the end of the day, Santa Monica cares about this franchise. They have always had a high standard of quality for their games, and I know that they can't be happy with the latter half of this one. I'm putting a lot of trust into the writers of this game to meet expectations, because they have never given me a reason to doubt them. I want to thank you guys again if you've gotten this far. Feel free to join my Discord if you'd like to hang out or chat. It's relatively new at this point, so there's only a handful of us in there. There's a link to the server in the description, so I'll see you there if you decide to join. I'd also greatly appreciate if you would consider subscribing. I think like 95% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so if you enjoyed the video enough to get this far, then I'd like to see you stick around. If you do, then I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.